Did you ever imagine two highly trained forces operatives taking on a ruthless biker gang in the very heart of a quiet town? If you've been following the nail-biting clashes and unexpected alliances that led to these high-stakes confrontations, you won't want to miss what happens next. In this section, we dive into the most intense showdown so far, where both sides face impossible odds, and not everyone comes out unscathed. The suspense is at an all-time high, and our heroines must rely on every skill they've honed, while the town braces for a final reckoning. Curious to see if justice prevails or if fear reclaims the streets. Keep watching and discover how a community's unity can challenge even the darkest threats. And don't forget to subscribe to our channel so you won't miss a single update. We have plenty more gripping stories ahead, each one a testament to courage, resilience, and the strength of standing together. Stay tuned. Ingrid Lindberg exhaled slowly as she gazed out the window of the Silver Spoon Diner, located on the quiet outskirts of Bayview, a modest town less than an hour's drive from Chicago. She and her twin sister, Freya, had come here hoping for anonymity after years of high-stakes military service that left them both physically and emotionally exhausted. Their transition back into civilian life had been anything but seamless. But tonight, as dusk settled over the diner's glowing neon sign and the hum of night insects replaced the daytime rush, Ingrid felt something close to peace. The smell of fried eggs and brewed coffee mingled in the air, and the muffled clink of utensils offered a comforting rhythm. Ingrid slid her gaze across the diner's interior, her keen awareness a habit she hadn't managed to shed even after leaving Special Forces. Noticing a few older couples quietly talking over their meals and a truck driver finishing his pie, she tried to relax her tense shoulders. Freya, wearing a white sweatshirt that contrasted with her dark hair, leaned in from across their booth, her elbows propped on the worn Formica table. A grin touched her lips as she recounted a light-hearted memory from their training days, one that involved a practical joke played on an unsuspecting drill instructor. Ingrid half listened, both amused and filled with nostalgia, but the younger twin's smile faded slightly when she realized Ingrid was scanning the room again. "Sis, you've got to learn how to switch off," Freya murmured, her tone playful yet tinged with gentle concern. "I know," Ingrid responded, fiddling with the spoon next to her coffee cup. "Old habits die hard, right?" She flashed her sister a small, self-conscious smile. Even in the relatively benign environment of a small-town diner, the Lindbergh twins still carried themselves with the coiled tension of seasoned operatives. Ingrid's well-worn leather jacket and Freya's pristine white sweatshirt might have painted them as two ordinary siblings grabbing a bite to eat, but a discerning eye could pick up on their confident posture and the subtle vigilance in their gazes. Ingrid focused on a slight scrape of shoes against the tiled floor, just a passing customer walking toward the restrooms. She willed herself to exhale, to let her guard down, if only for a few fleeting moments. Freya picked up on her sister's internal struggle and reached out, resting her hand lightly on Ingrid's wrist. "We're safe here," she said, her voice low. "Relax for once." Ingrid felt a pang of guilt. Her inability to fully unwind was starting to weigh on her sister too. She nodded and forced herself to smile. "You're right. Tonight we're just Ingrid and Freya grabbing dinner in a cozy, out-of-the-way diner." Before Ingrid could elaborate, Kimberly Watson, the young waitress who had been working at the Silver Spoon for the past few months, ambled over to refresh their coffee. She greeted them with a cheerful refill and a friendly smile that reached her eyes. The Lindberghs, though new to Bayview, had quickly formed a rapport with Kimberly. She recognized in them a certain reserved kindness, though she had no inkling of their true backgrounds. As she topped up Freya's mug, Kimberly casually asked, "You two settling in all right around here?" Freya nodded. "It's been quiet, which is what we were looking for," she said, keeping her tone even. Ingrid added a small thanks before Kimberly wandered off to tend another table. The comforting routine of diner life, from daily specials written on a chalkboard to the local banter about upcoming high school football games, was a far cry from the tension of a military outpost. For the Lindberghs, tonight was meant to be one more step toward normalcy, an elusive concept they were determined, despite their training and caution, to finally embrace. However, the quiet atmosphere soured the moment the diner door swung open with enough force to rattle the glass. A group of 5 bikers clad in dark vests and heavy boots strode in as if they owned the place. At their head was a tall, broad-shouldered man with an imposing presence. He sported a shaved head and a sneering grin, and on the back of his vest was a snarling wolf emblem, its teeth bared in a vicious display. The hush that fell over the Silver Spoon Diner was immediate and absolute, like a curtain dropped on a bustling theater stage. Ingrid and Freya exchanged a silent glance, honed by years of operating in dangerous territory. Ingrid's immediate impulse was to evaluate the potential threat. Could they be a harmless local motorcycle club, simply rowdy but not truly dangerous? Or were they something more sinister, with a capacity for violence ready to erupt at the slightest provocation? Freya, equally on guard, shifted almost imperceptibly in her seat, mentally calculating angles of approach and exit points. Leftover instincts from countless missions overseas. Their question was soon answered. The leader, Rhett Wolf Creighton, locked eyes on them from across the diner and let out a low chuckle. He took a few steps forward, his heavy boots echoing off the tiled floor. "Well, look what we have here," he said, his grin widening. "New faces in town, and they happen to be sitting in my corner." The arrogance rolling off him was palpable, and the other patrons seemed to shrink back, as though they feared drawing his attention. Kimberly paused mid-step, biting her lip as she held a coffee pot, uncertainty lining her features. Wolf's gaze momentarily flicked to her before returning to the twins, a flicker of cruelty in his eyes. Without breaking eye contact, Ingrid calmly set her mug down. Freya's posture, relaxed just seconds ago, now bordered on coiled readiness. They both knew what might happen next, yet they hoped to diffuse the tension. They had no desire to bring the chaos of their previous lives into this quiet corner of Bayview. Ingrid maintained a level, measured tone as she spoke. "We're not looking for trouble," she stated simply. Wolf gave a huff of a laugh, a hollow sound that resonated with challenge. "Trouble? We aren't trouble." He twisted his neck as if loosening up for a fight, his grin never wavering. "We just like to make sure everyone in Bayview knows who's got the final say around here." He gestured with a jerk of his chin, and one of his men, a wiry, jittery fellow with a pockmarked face, stepped forward. The other customers were frozen in their seats. Some looked away, desperate to avoid Wolf's attention. Others clutched their utensils or phones in silent anxiety. Kimberly set the coffee pot aside and took a trembling step backward, eyes darting to the phone on the counter. Ingrid could see her hands shaking, and she felt a surge of sympathy for the young waitress. No one should have to face open intimidation just for showing up to work. Freya caught Ingrid's glance and nodded, the pair reaching an unspoken decision to intervene if necessary. But Wolf wasn't finished. He leaned in, elbows propped aggressively on the back of a chair he'd spun around. "So, strangers, mind telling me what brings you to our little slice of heaven?" he asked, smirk twisting his lips. "Didn't you hear? We're not exactly a tourist-friendly spot." His tone implied that the entire town, not just the diner, was under his domain. It was clear that his crew, and likely their extended network, had run roughshod over Bayview for quite some time. Freya studied his expression before replying. "We're here for a quiet life," she said, her words carefully measured. "Nothing more. Why not let us finish our coffee and be on our way?" The briefest of silences followed, pregnant with tension. Wolf's grin turned predatory. "Because," he said in a low growl, "I don't think you get to decide that. Not in my town." In that moment, the tension snapped like a taut wire. One of Wolf's men, a squat, heavily muscled figure with a patchy beard, reached out as though to shove Ingrid's shoulder, perhaps to provoke her or test how quickly she would cower. It was a mistake he immediately regretted. Ingrid's reflexes kicked in. In a blur of movement, she seized his wrist, twisting it in a practiced maneuver designed to wrench compliance out of a larger attacker. A yelp of shock and pain escaped his lips as his knees slammed into the edge of the booth table. His expression contorted, torn between confusion and rage. Gasps rippled across the diner as patrons realized what had just occurred. Wolf's smug grin wavered for a split second before he lunged forward, clearly unwilling to let Ingrid's defense go unanswered. But Freya was ready. With a swift sidestep, she hooked her foot around Wolf's ankle in a subtle yet powerful maneuver, sending him off balance. He hit the linoleum floor with a grunt that reverberated in the sudden hush. Freya stepped back, her eyes never leaving the leader of the group. Like dominoes set into motion, the other gang members realized they needed to swarm as a pack. Two more lunged, one with fists raised, the other wielding a chipped wooden chair as an impromptu weapon. Ingrid ducked under the swinging chair legs, her instincts honed by years of specialized combat training. Even though she had renounced the structured world of the military, her body remembered every technique, every stance. She drove her elbow sharply into the second attacker's ribs, forcing the air out of his lungs in a ragged gasp. Meanwhile, Freya faced down the man with the fists. He was quick, but he telegraphed his movements, and she anticipated each jab with fluid ease. Shifting her weight onto the balls of her feet, she let him tire himself out with two wild swings, then executed a flawless palm strike to his sternum. He collapsed into a booth, rattling the condiments as he slumped. The entire skirmish took less than a minute, but to the shocked onlookers, it felt like it unspooled in slow motion. Plates clattered, silverware rattled, and a panicked hush descended. Kimberly had managed to scramble behind the counter, frantically punching in 911 on the cordless phone. She peeked from behind the menu stand, eyes wide, her breath ragged with panic. Wolf, disoriented, climbed to his feet. A bruise was already forming near his temple, and his mouth curled with fury. "Who the hell are you two?" he spat, his bravado momentarily dimmed by the realization that he and his men had been utterly outmatched. The arrogance faded, replaced by a flicker of something akin to genuine fear. Freya steadied herself, adrenaline coursing through her veins. For an instant, she was back on foreign soil, locked in a confrontation that demanded clear-headed decisiveness. She took a calming breath, recalling the vow she and Ingrid had made to each other. Never to use their skills for any cause but defense. "We're just two women trying to have dinner," she replied, her voice remarkably steady given the tension crackling in the air. Wolf's eyes blazed as he glanced from one battered gang member to the next. Finally, with his last shred of ego, he barked, "We'll finish this later." He motioned for his cohorts to retreat, and they limped and stumbled for the exit, tossing bitter glares over their shoulders. As Wolf reached the doorway, he looked back, eyes zeroing in on Ingrid. "You made a big mistake," he said, voice filled with an unsettling promise. Then he was gone, the door slamming behind him with a final rattle that echoed through the stunned diner. The aftermath of the confrontation felt surreal. For a few heartbeats, the diner remained frozen in silence, as if everyone present was trying to digest what had just unfolded. Then, pandemonium took hold. A middle-aged couple near the front booth started peppering Ingrid and Freya with questions. "Are you hurt? Who taught you to fight like that? Do you know those men?" Their words blurred together, an overlapping chorus of concern and curiosity. Kimberly emerged from her hiding spot behind the counter, phone still clutched in a trembling hand. "The police are on their piyama," she announced, her voice tight but relieved. She set the phone down, her eyes shifting between Ingrid and Freya. "I've never seen anyone stand up to Wolf like that," she added, amazement tinged with residual fear. "I thought he and his gang ran this place." Freya exchanged a glance with Ingrid. The protective veneer of their special forces training was still very much intact, and they knew that conflict often attracted as much scrutiny as it did relief. While they had no regrets about intervening, Wolf's men had clearly intended harm. Both sisters braced themselves for the inevitable questions from law enforcement. Experience told them that their background, once revealed, could spark further complications. "Are either of you injured?" Ingrid asked Kimberly, trying to steer the conversation towards something constructive. The waitress shook her head, setting the cordless phone on the counter. No, I'm fine," she stammered. "Just shaken. Thank you." She managed a weak smile, and in it, Ingrid detected not only gratitude, but a new sense of wonder at the formidable skill the sisters had shown. Before anyone could say more, the shrill sound of sirens cut through the night. Red and blue lights danced across the diner's windows as two squad cars screeched to a stop outside. Officers poured in, guns drawn, shouting commands for everyone to get down. Ingrid and Freya, hands raised in calm compliance, quickly found themselves at the center of attention. The tension in the air rekindled as though a fresh wave of conflict had arrived. An officer with graying hair and a worn expression, Sergeant Bronson, barked, "Everyone, remain where you are. Which ones were involved in the fight?" Several trembling patrons pointed at the twins. Bronson's gaze fell on them with the weight of suspicion. All right, you two, hands behind your backs. Freya hesitated, but Ingrid gave a quick nod, a silent reminder to cooperate. The sisters complied, feeling the cool bite of metal handcuffs snap around their wrists. Hold on, Kimberly interjected, voice quavering. They were defending themselves. Wolf's gang started the fight. Her appeals seemed to fall on deaf ears. Sergeant Bronson pressed his lips into a thin line. Ma'am, we'll sort it out at the station. Right now, everyone is a suspect. Two younger officers stepped in to escort Ingrid and Freya outside, glancing uneasily between the sisters as if they couldn't fathom how the pair had bested 5 grown men. Outside, a small crowd gathered, drawn by the flashing lights and the promise of late-night drama. Whispers threaded through the group. They took on Wolf's gang. Never thought I'd see someone stand up to him. Those women must be out of their minds. Ingrid felt a surge of conflicting emotions. Annoyance at the spectacle, concern for how quickly events were spiraling, and a certain relief that Wolf and his men weren't around to worsen the confrontation. Still, the knowledge that Wolf had threatened them lingered. As they were guided into a squad car, Ingrid locked eyes with Freya, who flashed a reassuring look. Even in handcuffs, even with the reality of a jail cell looming, they both knew the truth of what had happened. They had done the right thing in defending themselves and the diner's patrons. The real question now was how the authorities and the town would choose to see it. Inside the Bayview police station, a stark contrast to the warm diner they had left behind, Ingrid and Freya found themselves separated for individual questioning. Harsh fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, casting unforgiving shadows against the walls. The aroma of stale coffee merged with the lingering scent of disinfectant, and the constant hum of an antiquated air conditioner provided a monotonous backdrop. Ingrid sat at a metal table, her wrists chafing slightly from the too tight handcuffs. Across from her, a lean detective in his late 40s, Detective Rowan, flipping through a file with measured slowness. Occasionally he glanced up, his skeptical eyes scanning Ingrid's calm demeanor. Your name? He prompted, pen poised to take notes. Ingrid Lindberg, she replied. Her voice remained steady, but her heart pounded at the knowledge that full disclosure of her history could complicate matters. She hadn't expected to hide forever, but she had hoped that, by relocating to a quiet town, she might avoid the scrutiny that came with being a former Special Forces operative. Detective Rowan studied her. And you're new in Bayview, correct? When Ingrid nodded, he pressed on. We've got multiple witnesses saying you and your sister took down 5 bikers. Care to explain how 2, he paused, choosing his words carefully, unarmed civilians manage a feat like that? Ingrid offered a neutral expression. Self-defense. We both have some martial arts training, she said. She carefully omitted the years of specialized, government-funded instruction and the black ops missions that had shaped them into the proficient fighters they were. Meanwhile, in a separate interrogation room, Freya faced a similar line of questioning. Her interrogator, a rookie officer named Kelly, seemed even more bewildered by the twins' prowess. Were you two looking for a fight? Kelly asked, crossing her arms. Freya shook her head firmly. No, we came to Bayview to avoid trouble, not to make it. Wolf's men cornered us. We defended ourselves. Her voice was soft but carried an undercurrent of determination. As the hours ticked by, Ingrid and Freya's detention stretched longer than they anticipated. The police took statements from the diner's patrons, including Kimberly, who insisted that the Lindbergs were not the aggressors. Still, the official stance remained cautious. The potential for a violent retaliation by Wolf's gang loomed large in everyone's mind. Rhett Wolf Creighton had a reputation for retribution, and the authorities, accustomed to turning a blind eye or merely pacifying him, were now thrust into a more complicated role. Outside the station, the wheels of rumor began turning. Word of the fight raced through Bayview's social circles, crossing from neighbors to co-workers to distant relatives in the next county. Some expressed admiration for the twins. Others, wary of Wolf's retaliation, scorned the Lindbergs for stirring the pot. A handful even speculated that Ingrid and Freya must be criminals themselves. Why else would they fight so fearlessly? In this swirl of conflicting narratives, the sisters' fate hung in the balance. Close to midnight, Sheriff Harold McKinley made his first appearance in the corridor outside the interrogation rooms. A tall man with a broad-brimmed hat and lines of fatigue etched into his face. McKinley had earned a reputation as someone who walked a fine line between upholding the law and turning a blind eye to Bayview's dark undercurrents. Under the glow of flickering fluorescent lights, he conferred with Detective Rowan before stepping into Ingrid's interrogation room. Sheriff McKinley cleared his throat. "We've got statements from witnesses that back up your claim," he said, his southern-tinged voice calm, yet carrying an undercurrent of exhaustion. "But Wolf's telling anyone who'll listen that you assaulted him unprovoked. Now, we've seen the aftermath, and it doesn't look so simple." He fixed Ingrid with a searching gaze as if trying to parse who she really was. Ingrid returned his stare without flinching. "We defended ourselves. I can't change what he chooses to say." Inside, her instincts bristled. She knew how quickly a false narrative could spiral. McKinley sighed, rubbing the back of his neck. "We'll let you and your sister go soon, pending further investigation. But here's my advice. Be careful. Wolf's not known for letting grudges die quietly." After the sisters were released on their own recognizance, they stepped out into the cool early morning air, finding the police station's parking lot bathed in the glow of flickering streetlights. The hour was close to 3 a.m., and an eerie stillness had settled over the streets. Fatigue weighed on both Ingrid and Freya, but they remained acutely alert, scanning the surroundings for any sign of Wolf's gang. A half-dozen onlookers stood scattered around, drawn by curiosity or concern. Kimberly Watson was among them, wrapped in a light jacket, her eyes reflecting relief when she saw the sisters emerge. She hurried to meet them, her expression earnest. "Are you both okay?" she asked, voice trembling with residual anxiety. Freya managed a small nod. "We're fine," she said, though her shoulders were tense. Ingrid, typically more stoic, gave Kimberly a tight-lipped smile. "Thanks for sticking up for us," she added. "We owe you." Kimberly waved off the notion of debt. "You stood up for everyone in that diner," she insisted. "I just told the truth. I couldn't bear the thought of you two being blamed for something Wolf started." A question lingered behind her eyes. Why were these sisters so skilled at combat? But she didn't press, perhaps sensing their reluctance to elaborate. Instead, she offered them a ride home, which Ingrid politely declined. The sisters had driven their own battered pickup truck to the diner, and they preferred the semblance of self-reliance. As they climbed into their truck, Freya let out a slow breath. "Guess we didn't stay under the radar for long," she remarked. Ingrid tapped the steering wheel thoughtfully, the tension in her shoulders refusing to dissipate. "No," she agreed, "and we're not done dealing with Wolf." Their small apartment on the outskirts of town was just a 10-minute drive away, but on this night it felt longer. Sparse streetlights illuminated mostly empty roads, and the sisters couldn't shake the feeling that eyes were watching from the dark corners. Ingrid took extra caution, checking the rearview mirror for any telltale headlights that might follow them. Yet the ride passed uneventfully, leaving them with only their anxieties to contend with. In their modest apartment, a simple space furnished with mismatched chairs, a second-hand couch, and a kitchen table Ingrid had sanded down herself. They collapsed into chairs at the small dining area. Freya filled a glass of water at the sink, her mind churning through possibilities. "Wolf doesn't strike me as the type to let humiliation go," she said. Ingrid nodded, her gaze distant as she replayed the scuffle in her head. She recognized the lethal intensity in Wolf's eyes, the kind that signaled deep-seated cruelty and an insatiable appetite for dominance. "Tomorrow," Ingrid began, "we should gather as much evidence as we can, video from the diner, statements from witnesses. We need to make sure it's crystal clear we acted in self-defense. We also need to watch our backs." Her jaw tightened as she recalled the final threat Wolf had spat at them, the menacing promise that the confrontation was far from over. Freya leaned forward, resting her elbows on the table. "Do you ever wish we'd chosen a different place to start fresh? Maybe somewhere Wolf's type wouldn't exist?" Ingrid softened her posture and reached across to squeeze Freya's hand. "We can't outrun bullies forever. If not Wolf, it could have been someone else in a different town. We made a promise to ourselves years ago to stand up against any tyranny, even in civilian life. Maybe this is exactly where we're supposed to be." A small, wry smile tugged at Freya's lips. "Always the optimist, Ingrid." She rose from the chair and tugged at her sweatshirt, eyes drooping with fatigue. "Let's get some sleep. We'll need it." The sisters parted for the night, each lying awake longer than they would admit, bodies exhausted but minds busy with unspoken fears and unyielding resolve. Outside, the first hues of dawn began to lighten the sky, offering a fragile sense of calm that felt increasingly uncertain. Morning brought a flood of developments. News of the diner brawl had spread like wildfire through Bayview. To the sisters' dismay, they woke to find social media buzzing with various accounts of the incident, some accurate, some wildly exaggerated. A local gossip page featured a grainy cell phone video capturing a fragment of the fight. Ingrid twisting a biker's arm as Freya felled another with a swift kick. Comments piled up beneath the video, ranging from awe at the Lindberghs' prowess to condemnation accusing them of vigilante behavior. Freya swiped through the posts on her phone, shaking her head. Some people are asking if we're secret government assassins, she said, half joking, though the possibility of someone investigating their pasts weighed heavily on her. Ingrid peered over her sister's shoulder, her expression souring at one comment in particular that read, "No wonder Wolf is mad. These women came to our town and acted like they owned the place." Ingrid muttered, "They have no idea who Wolf really is, do they?" As if summoned by the mention of his name, a text flashed on Freya's phone from an unknown number. "Hope you liked your first night in the spotlight. Get ready for more." She showed it to Ingrid, who frowned. They both knew it had to be from Wolf or one of his cronies. The intimidation campaign was starting early. Determined not to let fear dictate their actions, Ingrid and Freya dressed in their usual casual attire, jeans, boots, and inconspicuous jackets, to head into town. First stop, the Silver Spoon Diner. Kimberly had promised to provide any security footage that might exonerate the sisters, or, at the very least, show Wolf's aggression. The late summer sun hovered high, and the twins walked with a purposeful stride despite the uneasy glances they received from a few passers-by. Upon entering the diner, they found Kimberly at the counter, poring over the outdated security system's data. She looked up with relief. "I was hoping you'd come. I've got some footage, but the cameras here are ancient, so it's grainy. Still, it clearly shows Wolf and his guys barging in first." She handed over a flash drive, cheeks flushed either from stress or the diner's stuffy air. "You can use it however you need to prove they started it." Gratitude filled Ingrid's eyes. "Thank you. We appreciate it more than you know." Freya concurred. "We'll get this to the police right away." Kimberly paused, pursing her lips. "I've worked here long enough to see how Wolf's gang operates. People are terrified of them. They extort business owners. They harass anyone who stands up to them." She tapped the counter nervously. "I just don't want you to regret taking them on." Freya offered her a gentle smile. "We won't, but we understand the risk." Ingrid added firmly, "They need to be held accountable. If the system won't do it on its own, maybe it just needs a push." Leaving Kimberly to her customers, who cast uncertain glances at the Lindberghs, the sisters ventured to the police station. Detective Rowan was out, but they managed to meet with a different officer who accepted the flash drive with cautious interest. "We'll review this," he said, wearing a guarded expression. "But keep in mind, Wolf and his men are well known around here. Some folks in town see them as a necessary evil." Freya bristled at the notion. Necessary evil? Their tactics are pure intimidation. That's not necessary, it's criminal. The officer shrugged, making a non-committal sound. Ingrid could sense the institutional wariness in his demeanor. Dealing with Wolf likely meant dealing with layers of local politics and a tight-knit group of enablers. As the sisters stepped back out into the blazing sunlight, a familiar cruiser pulled up. Sheriff McKinley got out, hitching his belter around his waist. His gaze flickered across the sisters, and he offered a curt nod. "Heard you brought in some evidence. Let's hope it helps." Then, lowering his voice, he added, "Watch your backs, ladies. Wolf's not the type to go quietly." While the Lindberghs worked to clear their names, Wolf fumed in a dank, cluttered garage on the outskirts of Bayview. Though it served as a makeshift headquarters for his gang, it was more than that. It was his fortress, the very seat of his power. Tools, half-disassembled engines, and the stale smell of cigarette smoke filled the dim space. Wolf paced back and forth, a bruise forming around his temple and a cut visible near his lip, courtesy of the altercation at the diner. Around him, 4 of his men nursed their own bruises, their pride battered as much as their bodies. A wiry young biker named Denny eyed Wolf uncertainly. You good, boss? He asked, clearing his throat. Wolf shot him a withering glare, as if the question itself was an affront. I'm fine, he snapped, though his posture betrayed simmering anger. Just can't believe two random women took us by surprise like that. Max, the burly enforcer of the group, spat on the concrete floor. We underestimated them. Next time we'll be ready. His bravado elicited a half-hearted grunt of agreement from the others, though the lingering sting of defeat sapped the room's usual swagger. Wolf clenched his fists. This is not just about losing a fight. This is about reputation. We run Bayview, and we can't let these newcomers think otherwise. He stopped pacing long enough to glare at each of his men in turn. We'll strike back, but we'll do it smart. I'm not ending up in a jail cell because we acted recklessly. He paused, thinking. Then he tilted his head toward one of the men, a lanky figure wearing a worn leather vest. Bobby, don't we have contacts at the local paper? Maybe we can spin this our way. Bobby nodded, a thin smile curving his lips. Yeah, old man Jenkins owes us for not trashing his kid's car last year. Wolf's smile returned, colder than before. Good, make some calls. I want the story out that these women are the aggressors. Paint them like outsiders, stirring trouble. The more doubt we can cast, the better. As Wolf and his men strategized, an undercurrent of fear began seeping through the town. Some business owners, already paying protection money to Wolf, dreaded the possibility of more violence. They whispered among themselves, eyeing the sisters with suspicion, convinced that any further altercations would bring ruin down on all their heads. Meanwhile, others quietly cheered the Lindberghs for standing up to a bully, exchanging hushed endorsements at the grocery store, the post office, and behind closed doors. The seeds of division had been sown, and Wolf intended to use that division to his advantage. He hammered out calls to acquaintances around town, urging them to spread rumors that the Lindberghs were ex-cons, troublemakers, or government plants sent to undermine local businesses. The truth mattered little when a lie could be repeated often enough to become plausible. Meanwhile, Ingrid and Freya remained largely unaware of the orchestrated smear campaign. They spent the rest of the day with eyes over their shoulders, mindful that Wolf might retaliate at any moment. Returning to their apartment, they scanned the roads and alleys, but no tale materialized. Instead, the true attack came through social channels and the whispering grapevine of Bayview. Late in the evening, Freya spotted a local news website labeling the sisters dangerous newcomers, quoting an anonymous source who claimed they were trained fighters looking for a confrontation. Freya's mouth tightened. This is their doing, she muttered, frustration lacing her tone. Ingrid glanced over her shoulder and nodded grimly. Wolf won't fight us face to face until he's sure the town is on his side, or at least until we're isolated. Meeting her sister's gaze, she added, we need to fight back by showing everyone the truth. The following morning, another twist hit the sisters. They awoke to a knocking at their door. Ingrid opened it to find Colonel Daniel Abrams, a tall, authoritative man in civilian attire that did little to hide his military bearing. He had been a commanding officer both sisters had served under, though neither had expected to see him again so soon, especially not at their new doorstep. Freya, sipping coffee in the background, nearly choked in surprise when she recognized him. Ingrid, Freya, Abrams greeted, removing a cap that bore a small insignia of the unit they had once been part of. I heard you two ran into some complications. He offered a half-smile that didn't quite reach his eyes, reflecting his concern. Ingrid stepped aside to let him in, her mind buzzing with questions. Why was the colonel here, and how had he heard about their predicament? Abrams didn't beat around the bush. You two are trending in certain circles, he explained as he took a seat. Word got back to me about a video from a diner fight. Impressive, but also risky. Someone recognized your fighting style. They forwarded it up the chain, and I recognized you. Did you plan to put your training to use in Bayview? Freya shook her head. Of course not. We wanted a fresh start. She leaned forward, resting her elbows on her knees. But Wolf, this biker gang leader, he forced our hand. Abrams listened, nodding occasionally. I looked into Wolf's background. He's got a rap sheet but has avoided conviction, likely thanks to intimidation and local connections. He paused, surveying their humble apartment. Now, I'm not here in an official capacity, but I felt obligated to warn you. If you don't handle this carefully, it could blow up. People might frame you as the aggressors, especially if they dig into your special forces record. We know, Ingrid replied evenly, letting out a weary breath. She laid out their plan to gather evidence, ensure local law enforcement had the diner's security footage, and publicly set the record straight. Abrams rubbed his chin. Social media might be your best friend right now. If Wolf's painting you as villains, you need to counter that narrative. Before leaving, Abrams left a card on the table. That's my number. If things escalate beyond local trouble, call me. I might not be able to solve all your problems, but I can pull a few strings. Freya gave him a grateful smile, while Ingrid placed the card in her wallet with a nod of thanks. They had been part of Abrams's unit for years, and although they had parted ways amicably, they never expected him to step back into their lives like this. It was a reminder that their past was never truly behind them. Colonel Abrams's words echoed in their minds after he left. Counter the narrative. That became their mission for the day. Freya set up a social media account dedicated to clarifying the diner incident, posting clips from Kimberly's security footage alongside short statements from witnesses who confirmed that Wolf had thrown the first punch. Ingrid reached out to the local news station, speaking politely but firmly to a skeptical reporter. We have proof of what really happened. Don't just run one side of the story. Within hours, the online chatter began to shift. While Wolf's supporters continued to sling accusations, others were swayed by the raw footage that showed the Lindberghs calmly responding to an unprovoked attack. People started asking why local law enforcement had let Wolf run rampant for so long, especially if he was so quick to violence. The sisters' digital presence put them squarely in the public eye, for better or worse. Still, as night approached, the weight of Wolf's looming threat settled over them like a dark cloud. Freya double-checked the locks on their doors, remembering the malice in Wolf's eyes when he had promised they'd regret standing up to him. Ingrid quietly set her phone to vibrate, placing it within arm's reach. Though they were no longer active duty soldiers, old habits died hard. Each remained ready, if not eager, for any potential confrontation that might come knocking. The next 48 hours were a whirlwind of tension and revelations. Local interest in the sisters' situation soared after the newspaper released an article that more accurately depicted the diner brawl. To the sisters' surprise, some within Bayview rallied to their side. Business owners who had felt cornered by Wolf began posting anonymously online, sharing their own encounters with the biker gang's intimidation tactics. Stories emerged of protection fees demanded at local bars and veiled threats against families who refused to comply. At the same time, a faction of residents doubled down on blaming Ingrid and Freya. Their argument was straightforward. We know Wolf's trouble, but at least he's trouble we can predict. These strangers came in and made things worse. It was a short-sighted viewpoint born from fear. After years of living under Wolf's shadow, many found it less terrifying to accept the devil they knew rather than embrace an uncertain future. Sheriff Harold McKinley was caught in the middle. Pressured by a rapidly evolving public opinion, he convened a brief press conference outside the station. We take all allegations seriously, he said in a measured tone, and we are actively investigating both the altercation at the Silver Spoon Diner and the broader concerns regarding Rhett Wolf Creighton's activities. McKinley's reluctance was palpable, but he couldn't afford to ignore the uproar any longer. Cameras flashed, reporters asked pointed questions, and for the first time in years, Wolf's hold on Bayview started to slip in the eyes of the law. For Ingrid and Freya, each day felt like walking a tightrope. Whenever they ventured outside, they sensed watchful eyes following them. From Wolf's affiliates or from the townspeople, they couldn't always discern. Kimberly, determined to protect her newfound friends, invited them to stay at her place for a few nights. But the sisters politely declined. They didn't want to endanger anyone else. Instead, they installed a simple security camera at their apartment door and made sure to vary their daily routines. Matters came to a head one evening when, just after sunset, the sisters heard a knock at their door. Ingrid peered through the peephole, heart hammering. Outside stood a young man in plain clothes holding a large envelope and looking decidedly uneasy. She opened the door cautiously. "You the Lindbergh sisters?" the man asked, voice trembling with nerves. He had short brown hair and wore sneakers that squeaked on the linoleum floor. "Yes," Ingrid replied. "Who are you?" He swallowed hard. "Name's Ethan. Look, I used to run with Wolf's crew. Nothing major, just small stuff like errands and bike repairs. But I saw what happened at the diner and I can't keep quiet anymore. He thrust the envelope toward her. In there is some documentation, receipts, records of some of the money Wolf and his guys collected. I don't want to be part of this anymore. His eyes darted around like a frightened animal. I'm leaving Bayview tonight. I just wanted to give you something that might help. Freya joined Ingrid at the door, eyebrows raised as she eyed the envelope. It felt heavy in her hands, a tangible piece of evidence that could confirm Wolf's extortion schemes. Why give this to us? Freya asked. Ethan managed a trembling shrug. You're the only ones who ever stood up to him and didn't back down. People might actually listen to you. His gaze flicked down the hallway as if expecting someone to burst in at any second. I've got to go. Good luck. Without further explanation, he hurried off, leaving the sisters more hopeful and more nervous than before. Before the shock of Ethan's visit could fully settle, the sisters meticulously combed through the envelope's contents. Inside were photocopies of ledgers detailing amounts collected from various businesses, notes scribbled about monthly dues, and even references to threats Wolf had made against families. The evidence was substantial, enough to cast serious doubt on any claim that Wolf's gang was merely a group of harmless bikers. Ingrid felt a swell of determination. This could change everything, she said, carefully sliding the documents into protective sleeves. We have to get this to the authorities first thing in the morning. Freya nodded, though an undercurrent of tension marred her expression. Yes, but we need to be mindful of how we present it. If we walk in there with this envelope, Wolf might suspect we have an inside source and retaliate. We should make copies, keep the original safe somewhere else. They worked late into the night, scanning the documents onto a secure flash drive and storing the originals in a locking box beneath their bed. The tight quarters of their apartment felt even smaller as the gravity of their discovery pressed in on them. Freya paused at one point, glancing at Ingrid. Do you think Wolf had any clue someone like Ethan would betray him? Ingrid sat back, rubbing her eyes. Hard to say. Wolf's arrogance could blind him to the idea of betrayal, but if he finds out, it won't be pretty. For Ethan's sake, I hope he's already far from Bayview. A momentary pang of guilt tugged at Ingrid. She had spent years operating in war zones, but the reality of civilian life included complexities and moral dilemmas she hadn't fully anticipated. In the early hours of dawn, exhaustion threatened to overwhelm them, yet neither sister could sleep. They decided it was safest to drive to the local sheriff's office at first light, hoping the chain of custody for these documents would remain unbroken. When the sun finally rose, they loaded up their pickup with a sense of grim resolve. Approaching the station, they noticed a handful of journalists lingering outside, camera crews likely tipped off by the swirling rumors around Wolf. The sisters exchanged wary glances but proceeded inside. They requested a meeting with Detective Rowan, presenting the trove of documentation and explaining how it came into their possession, omitting Ethan's identity as best they could. Rowan's skeptical expression shifted to intrigue, then concern as he leafed through the files. This is significant, he said, brow furrowing. If this is genuine, Wolf could face charges far beyond just assault. Sheriff McKinley entered midway through the meeting, eyeing the sisters and the evidence with a mixture of caution and respect. You two sure know how to stir up a hornet's nest, he said, his voice tinged with weary irony. We'll have to verify the authenticity of these records, cross-reference them with complaints and financial ledgers in town. Freya held her tongue, knowing better than to push too hard. Yet her frustration simmered. This is exactly why people never came forward, she said, calmer than she felt. They were afraid it would either be ignored or lead to worse retaliation. We need to move swiftly, or Wolf will have time to cover his tracks. McKinley locked eyes with her. I understand, but the wheels of justice can be slow. I'll do my part, but I can't promise immediate arrests. He then gestured to a younger officer, instructing him to catalog the documents thoroughly. In the meantime, he continued, shifting his attention back to the sisters, I suggest you watch yourselves. If Wolf gets wind that you brought this in, things could get ugly. Stepping outside into the crisp morning air, Ingrid and Freya felt both relief and foreboding. They were closer to unmasking Wolf's reign over Bayview than anyone had come in years, but the potential fallout loomed ominously. Freya peered at Ingrid, one eyebrow arched. We're in deep now, she said, half a statement, half a question. Ingrid nodded firmly. Yeah, we are. But we didn't come here to hide forever. They climbed into their pickup, a shared sense of purpose guiding them forward. Their fates and Bayview's were now inexorably entwined. Whatever Wolf's next move might be, the Lindbergh sisters wouldn't face it lying down. Sunlight filtered through the dusty windows of the Bayview Sheriff's Office, catching motes of particles drifting lazily in the early morning air. Ingrid and Freya Lindbergh had just handed over the incriminating documents to Detective Rowan and Sheriff Harold McKinley, feeling a quiver of relief tempered by the weight of responsibility. Evidence against Rhett Wolf Creighton lay scattered across Rowan's desk. Grainy printouts, marked-up ledgers detailing extortion money, and photocopied receipts linking Wolf's gang to a series of shady deals around town. Rows of numbers hinted at a deeper network of threats, unpaid debts, and strong-arm tactics. To Ingrid and Freya, it looked like the final push that could tilt the town's narrative, if the authorities played their cards right. Yet the sisters harbored no illusions. They exchanged knowing glances, recalling more than one occasion during their Special Forces years when hard-won intel ended up mired in bureaucratic red tape or corrupted by someone on the take. As Detective Rowan gathered the papers into a neat stack, he maintained a neutral expression. His pen tapped against his notebook in a quick, rhythmic staccato, as though a battle raged behind his gaze. Sheriff McKinley loomed nearby, arms folded, his large-brimmed hat resting on the edge of a chair. He gave a slow nod when Rowan mentioned verifying the authenticity of the records, but the lines across his forehead betrayed deeper concern. After detailing how the envelope had arrived at their doorstep, Ingrid and Freya remained deliberately vague about Ethan's identity. They claimed a confidential source provided the documents, a half-truth that served two purposes. First, it protected Ethan from any immediate backlash should Wolf discover his betrayal. Second, it prevented Wolf's allies within Bayview from pinpointing exactly who had shared such damning evidence. Ingrid thought back to the young man's trembling hands and darting eyes. Even as she tried to reassure him, she knew there was no guarantee of his safety. "You two have done more than most would dare," Detective Rowan remarked, thumbing through a freshly revealed page. A fleeting hint of admiration sparked in his normally stoic gaze. "But passing along this intel doesn't put you into the clear. It might paint a bigger target on your backs." He spoke with the subdued candor of someone who'd witnessed the town's darker facets for far too long. "We understand," Freya replied, her tone measured. "We just hope this is the catalyst for real change. If Wolf's enterprise goes unchecked, Bayview remains trapped under his thumb." Sheriff McKinley exhaled audibly, adjusting his stance. "Let me speak plainly. Wolf's got connections here. People who owe him favors or fear him enough to bend the rules. And if he suspects you're behind all this, it won't be a fair fight." McKinley's eyes flicked over the sisters, a flicker of genuine sympathy crossing his face. "Keep an eye out. My deputies will do what they can, but I can't promise full protection in every corner of town." With that sober caution, Ingrid and Freya left the station, stepping outside into a swirl of shifting perceptions. Word about their unmasking of Wolf's records had begun to spread, ignited by rumors swirling through social media and local whispers. They felt the tide turning, but as with any rapidly forming wave, there was risk of a crash. Standing beneath the warm sun, the Lindbergh sisters both recognized the precariousness of their situation. They were closer than ever to dismantling Wolf's grip on Bayview, but also at greater personal risk than they had ever been since arriving. A small congregation of onlookers had gathered outside the sheriff's office, their curiosity piqued by the presence of camera crews, local journalists, and a few outspoken residents. Ingrid noticed they eyed her and Freya with a mix of respect and wariness. Once, the twins had been largely invisible strangers in Bayview. Now they were the center of a storm the town hadn't fully acknowledged until it was forced into the spotlight. Among the crowd stood Pearl Yamazaki, a local activist who ran a modest legal advocacy group out of a cramped office near the town library. She wore her characteristic bright scarf, and her determined posture gave the impression of someone who understood that real change was built on small but persistent efforts. Catching sight of the Lindbergh sisters, Pearl waved them over, her voice low to avoid drawing extra attention. "I've been following what's happening," she said, genuine concern lacing her tone. "We don't have a big organization. But if you need help, legal counsel, or just a place to gather witnesses, we can provide that. Freya's face lit up with grateful surprise. She and Ingrid had grown accustomed to the notion that most of Bayview's residents were too afraid to show any open support. We appreciate it, Freya replied. Every bit of help counts right now. Pearl nodded, glancing around to ensure no suspicious figures lurked nearby. Be careful, she warned, her voice dropping further. From what I've heard, Wolf is furious. He's threatening to reclaim his town. A hint of fear flashed in her eyes. He lost face when you stood up to him at the diner, but losing control of his income stream has pushed him to a breaking point. Just then, a tall man with a handheld camera edged closer, overhearing enough to sense a story angle. Quickly, Ingrid ducked away, guiding Freya to a quieter spot by an aging oak tree on the station's lawn. The last thing they needed was to reveal more than necessary on camera, especially concerning Pearl's assistance or Ethan's identity. Still, the encounter felt emblematic of Bayview's current transformation. For every person stepping out of the shadows to support the sisters, there was a lens or microphone poised to spin the narrative anew. Once safely out of earshot from the press, Ingrid exhaled in relief. We'll have to strategize carefully from here, she said, her tone thoughtful. We can't afford to let every conversation become a headline. Freya nodded in agreement, tapping her phone's screen to check the latest barrage of messages. The public's perception was a shifting battleground. Some praised the sisters' courage, while others accused them of disrupting Bayview's fragile balance. The sisters recognized that Wolf's manipulative reach extended beyond physical intimidation. The swirl of misinformation, anonymous online accounts, rumors about their special forces background, and half-truths circulated by Wolf's loyalists posed just as grave a threat. It feels like we're in a war zone, Freya observed softly, recalling nights in foreign deserts or hidden jungles where they had navigated a fog of conflicting intel. Ingrid nodded. Same tactics, different battlefield. They knew from experience that wars weren't always fought with bullets. They were equally waged with fear, rumors, and alliances forged in secrecy. As they made their way toward their pickup, the heat of the sun seeping into their jackets, the Lindbergh sisters braced themselves for the next onslaught, uncertain but resolute in their purpose. That afternoon, they decided to visit Kimberly Watson at the Silver Spoon Diner. The diner had become an unlikely hub for local discourse since the altercation. Ingrid and Freya found themselves craving a moment of normalcy, even if it was amid the tension swirling around them. Stepping through the front door brought a wave of comfort. The aroma of sizzling bacon and fresh coffee blended with the drone of customers chatting over late lunches. Despite the cozy atmosphere, the energy felt charged, as if an unspoken question hovered in the air. What happens next? Kimberly spotted them immediately, beckoning them to a booth near the back. A few heads turned as they walked across the tiled floor, but no one openly confronted them. If anything, the diner's patrons seemed more curious than hostile. Sliding into the booth, Ingrid studied the crowd, scanning for any sign of trouble. Freya did the same, their innate caution showing no sign of diminishing. Kimberly approached with a determined expression and placed 2 tall glasses of iced tea on the table. On the house, she said, lowering her voice. I heard about the documents you handed over. People are talking. Some of them are shocked by the extent of Wolf's crimes. Others are in denial. But if you ask me, this town needed a wake-up call. Freya sipped her tea, grateful for the coolness against her parched throat. We're just worried that Wolf might escalate. He's not someone who likes losing control, she said, carefully measuring her words. Have you noticed anything strange lately? People lurking or new members of his crew? Kimberly glanced over her shoulder, her expression tightening. There have been men loitering outside after closing. They wear biker jackets, maybe Wolf's. They never come in, but they watch, almost like they're waiting for something. It's unnerving. Ingrid's jaw clenched at the confirmation. A portion of her had hoped Wolf might lay low to avoid attention, but she knew from personal experience that men like him often double down on intimidation when cornered. Call us if you see anything more, Ingrid urged, sliding a napkin across the table. On it, she jotted her phone number and a secondary line connected to a local ally Colonel Abrams had recommended they trust if they needed backup. Day or night, we'll respond. Kimberly gave a resolute nod. Same goes for you two. If you need a place to hide out. Her words lingered. She seemed to realize mid-sentence that her modest apartment might not be the most secure option. Well, you know I've got your backs no matter what. Their conversation was interrupted by the sound of the diner's door swinging open. Three men strolled in, not wearing any overt biker patches, but oozing a certain swagger that set Ingrid and Freya on edge. They leaned against the counter, scanning the room with a proprietary air. One caught sight of the sisters and smirked, whispering something to his companions. All three laughed under their breath, never taking their eyes off the twins. Kimberly paled. "They're new," she murmured, forcing a tight smile as she prepared to greet them. Ingrid and Freya exchanged a meaningful look. If Wolf had started sending out new faces, likely outsiders less recognizable to the locals, this was indeed an escalation. Gangs often contracted drifters or nomadic bikers to handle specific tasks, precisely because they weren't tied to a particular town. The Lindberghs silently prepared themselves, each readjusting her seated position in case a confrontation brewed. In Bayview's charged atmosphere, a peaceful lunch could turn violent at a moment's notice. Before Ingrid or Freya could decide on a course of action, the three newcomers broke their gaze and walked over to a booth far on the opposite side of the diner, near the windows. One of them, a tall man sporting a scar across his cheek, raised a hand to catch Kimberly's attention. She gave the sisters an uneasy shrug, then headed over with her notepad to take their orders. The tension, while palpable, didn't immediately escalate. Still, Ingrid and Freya remained vigilant, sipping iced tea as they continued to observe. A few minutes later, Colonel Daniel Abrams arrived, his presence as unexpected as ever. Spotting the twins, he walked toward their booth, removing his cap in a courteous gesture. "Fancy running into you two here, Art," he remarked. His eyes flicked around the diner, lingering a moment on the three unfamiliar men near the window. Then he slid into the seat across from Ingrid and Freya. "Hope I'm not intruding." Freya shook her head. "Not at all. Actually, we've been wanting to update you on some new developments." She kept her voice low, aware that certain ears might be keen to eavesdrop. Abrams leaned in, bracing his forearms on the table. "I heard about the envelope. Word gets around fast, especially when such damaging evidence is in play. I'm proud of you both for taking that step. It's a risk, but a necessary one." Ingrid, her gaze roaming the diner, spoke in an undertone. "Wolf's retaliation is underway, if you ask us. He's got watchers posted outside businesses. Some new faces just walked in here, likely to make a statement. We're bracing for what comes next." Kimberly, returning from taking the stranger's orders, approached with a pot of fresh coffee. She glanced around nervously before pouring a cup for Abrams. "Can I get you anything else?" Abrams thanked her politely and then resumed his conversation with the sisters. "I've called in a few favors with some folks I trust, private security types who can keep an eye on developments without being directly tied to law enforcement. Sometimes that's safer." He paused to take a careful sip of coffee. "But I can't overstep too much, or Wolf will claim I'm orchestrating a military takeover." Freya gave a bitter laugh. "That's likely his next rumor anyway. If he's not calling us dangerous drifters, he's claiming we're some government plant." Abrams drummed his fingers on the table. "Sadly, that's effective propaganda for people who are scared. Fear can turn rational folks into conspiracists." His gaze drifted to the windows, where sunlight revealed the battered sign of a hardware store across the street. A man stood in front of it, arms crossed, staring at the diner's entrance. Sensing Abrams's unease, Ingrid offered a grim nod. "Yeah, that's about how things have been." As if on cue, the tall man with the scar let out a loud laugh from his booth, glancing in their direction with a smirk. The tension felt like a live wire running through the room. Kimberly lingered at the table with a fresh carafe of water, her eyes darting between the sisters, the colonel, and the three men. The undercurrent of confrontation made the typical diner clatter, the clang of pots, the sizzle of a grill, the hum of conversation, feel like a fragile veneer masking something primal. Any spark could ignite the situation. Ingrid felt her muscles coil in anticipation, and Freya's hands subtly moved closer to her side, where she might steady herself if needed. They all understood that in Wolf's evolving chess game, every look, every silence, and every seemingly mundane cup of coffee was a potential piece in play. As the late afternoon sun angled through the diner's blinds, Colonel Abrams quietly suggested they relocate somewhere less public to talk in detail. Ingrid and Freya agreed it was too risky to remain in a place where casual onlookers or Wolf's lackeys could glean every piece of information. Kimberly, ever sympathetic, squeezed Freya's shoulder. "You all be careful," she whispered, casting one last uneasy glance at the three strangers. Back outside, a refreshing breeze rustled through the leafy canopy that lined the street. Abrams directed them to his car, a nondescript sedan parked a block away. "It's better if we don't all leave together," he advised, passing Ingrid a piece of paper with an address. "Head here, an abandoned property near the edge of town. We can speak privately." His stoic expression softened as he looked at Freya. "Make sure no one's following you." They parted ways. Ingrid and Freya climbed into their own pickup, mindful of any suspicious vehicles that might be surveilling them. The midday traffic was light, mostly a few sedans and pickups with local business decals. Freya drove, checking her rearview mirror frequently. Ingrid kept track of a silver SUV that seemed to match their route for several blocks, only to peel off onto a side road without incident. By the time they reached the outskirts of Bayview, they were relatively confident they hadn't been followed. At least, not closely. The property Abrams had indicated turned out to be an old farmhouse and barn, likely abandoned decades ago, with peeling paint and weeds overrunning a dirt driveway. The barn door stood slightly ajar, creaking in the breeze. Ingrid's senses were on high alert as they parked and stepped out. Freya scanned the surroundings: rusted farming equipment, a rotted wooden fence, and a scattering of wildflowers that somehow thrived amidst the neglect. Abrams pulled up a couple of minutes later, dust kicking up behind his tires on the unpaved road. He hopped out, giving the area a cursory glance before joining the sisters near the barn's entrance. "This place belongs to an old friend who moved down south. I promised to check in on it once in a while," he explained. "No one should bother us here." Inside the barn, beams of light filtered through cracks in the wooden walls, illuminating dust motes suspended in the still air. A sweet, slightly musty smell reminded Ingrid of hay and livestock from some bygone era. Wooden crates sat stacked in a corner, and an old tractor tire leaned against the far wall. It was quiet, almost eerily so, but at least no unexpected visitors lurked within. Abrams wasted no time, fixing each sister with a serious look. "I need to know exactly what your plan is if Wolf escalates." His tone conveyed both concern and the practicality of someone who'd overseen missions in conflict zones. Freya folded her arms, letting out a measured breath. "The short answer is, we don't have a detailed plan, just a set of contingencies. We'll continue cooperating with Detective Rowan and Sheriff McKinley, pushing for official action against Wolf. But if Wolf brings the fight directly to us, we'll defend ourselves. Same as we did at the diner." Abrams nodded. "That's what I figured. But you should also consider how to protect the people around you, like Kimberly and others who support you. Wolf knows hurting them could be an easier way to strike at you without risking a head-on confrontation." Ingrid's expression darkened. "We won't let that happen," she said firmly, but she recognized the truth in Abrams's warning. In warfare or in crime, terrorizing one's enemies by targeting their friends was a common, ugly tactic. Even so, they could only be in so many places at once. The conversation inside the barn stretched on, weaving between tactical planning and deeper reflections on how drastically life in Bayview had changed since the Lindberghs arrived. Ingrid recounted the swirl of rumors on social media, while Freya detailed the glimpses of Wolf's watchers outside businesses. Abrams listened patiently, occasionally interjecting with parallels to insurgent tactics the sisters remembered from their deployments overseas. It was an odd realization. Bayview wasn't a war-torn region, yet the methods Wolf employed, coercion, fear, infiltration, bore unsettling similarities to militia operations the Lindberghs had once fought against. Midway through the discussion, Abrams's phone buzzed. He glanced at it, his brow furrowing. "Just got a message from one of my local contacts. A woman named Pearl Yamazaki says trouble is brewing downtown." He read further, eyes narrowing. "Apparently, Wolf's men are planning to demonstrate in front of the sheriff's office, claiming they're unfairly targeted. They want to protest the so-called false accusations about extortion." Freya let out a sharp laugh laced with incredulity. Protest? That's one way to spin it. She pressed her lips into a firm line, recalling times she had seen similarly orchestrated stunts used to legitimize criminal groups in the public eye. If Wolf's men positioned themselves as victims of a smear campaign, it could sway residents who were on the fence. We need to head back, Ingrid concluded, voice steady. We should show our faces. Let people see we're not hiding. Also, if Wolf's rally gets out of hand, it'll be good to have extra witnesses who can attest to who starts the violence, if it comes to that. Abrams nodded his agreement, though concern flickered in his eyes. Just remember, Wolf might be baiting you. He knows if a physical altercation happens out in the open, certain corners of the town will blame you too. Be smart. Together they stepped outside the barn and into the late afternoon glow. The warmth of the sun had waned slightly, replaced by the lengthening shadows of early evening. Birds chirped along the fence line, seemingly oblivious to the crisis unfolding in human affairs. The rural tranquility offered a stark contrast to the tension building downtown. The drive back to Bayview proper was marked by a careful watch for tails. Ingrid and Freya took a circuitous route, doubling back on side streets to ensure no suspicious vehicles followed them. Satisfied they were alone, they navigated toward Main Street, where the sheriff's office fronted a modest strip of government buildings. Even from a few blocks away, they could see a gathering crowd, half motorcycles, half pedestrians. As they drew nearer, their stomachs tightened. Wolf's men, clad in their signature vests with the snarling wolf emblem, lined the sidewalk. Some carried signs that read, "Stop police harassment," or "We have rights too." Others simply lounged near their bikes, casting hostile glares at passers-by. A handful of residents stood off to the side, watching with a mixture of trepidation and fascination. The press was there too, cameras trained on the swirling scene. Freya parked the pickup behind a news van, scanning the row of parked motorcycles. She counted at least 10. Ingrid exhaled, remembering Colonel Abrams's caution about potential baiting. As they stepped onto the sidewalk, a hush fell among the bikers, their eyes zeroing in on the Lindberghs. It was as though the entire protest had been orchestrated for this moment, to put Ingrid and Freya under scrutiny and paint them as antagonists. The question was whether they could navigate Wolf's trap without fueling his propaganda. A small group of journalists, sensing the impending drama, gravitated toward Ingrid and Freya the instant they appeared. Microphones and cameras hovered inches from their faces, accompanied by a barrage of questions. "Are you here to confront Wolf's men?" asked one journalist, the bright red recording light on his camera unwavering. Another asked, "What do you say to the allegation that you've been provoking these bikers since you arrived in Bayview?" Freya kept her composure, though she could feel heat rising in her cheeks. Ingrid, equally calm, took a step forward. "We're here because this so-called protest is built on a lie she began, her tone measured but resolute. "The men claiming harassment are the same ones who've extorted local businesses, threatened residents, and attacked us in a diner without provocation." Almost instantly, a chorus of jeers erupted from the bikers. One of Wolf's men, a stocky figure with tattoos snaking up his arms, raised a sign reading, "Self-defense is not a crime." The irony was not lost on Ingrid, but she held her tongue, unwilling to lose control. Another biker roared, "You got no proof," to which Ingrid nearly retorted by mentioning the documents they had handed over to the police. But she and Freya had agreed not to escalate publicly. Not yet. Sheriff McKinley stepped out of the building with a couple of deputies, his expression a tight blend of exasperation and vigilance. He approached Ingrid and Freya, motioning them closer so the cameras wouldn't pick up every word. "We're trying to keep this demonstration peaceful," he murmured. "I'd advise you not to get into a shouting match with them." He flicked his gaze to the assembled throng of bikers who were revving their engines in sporadic bursts for dramatic effect. Freya's lips thinned. "We won't give Wolf what he wants," she said, crossing her arms. "Any sign of him?" McKinley shook his head. "Not yet. He might show, or he might be orchestrating this from behind the scenes. Hard to say." Casting a wary glance at the crowd, he added, "Stay alert. If things turn violent, we'll have to break it up." On the fringes, Colonel Abrams stood partially obscured by a tree, phone in hand, silently documenting the scene. If Wolf tried to skew the narrative, Abrams planned to release his own footage. Ingrid exchanged a nod with him, grateful for the support. She then turned her attention back to the protest. Two more bikers had arrived, each wearing dark sunglasses and smirking at the spectacle. Dozens of onlookers formed a ring around the group, uncertain whether to walk away or watch the tension play out. Suddenly, a battered pickup truck rumbled down the street, its engine growling like thunder. It pulled up in front of the bikers, and from it stepped none other than Wolf himself. He looked every inch the aggrieved leader, sporting a bandaged knuckle, a contusion near his temple from the diner fight, and an air of hardened resentment. As he slammed the driver's door, a hush fell over his assembled followers, an unspoken acknowledgement of their boss's presence. Wolf took stock of the scene, the cameras, the crowd, and finally the Lindbergh sisters. His eyes narrowed. With an almost theatrical air, he lifted his chin and proclaimed, "We won't stand for false accusations and persecution." A cheer rose from his men. More cameras flashed, capturing his defiant pose. Ingrid's gut twisted. This was Wolf's play, to present himself as a misunderstood outlaw, standing up for his freedom. If they weren't careful, he might succeed in rewriting the entire narrative, painting them as the villains in front of the entire town. Wolf's performance was worthy of a stage. He walked up to the line of police barricades that Sheriff McKinley and his deputies had hastily set up, his men flanking him like an honor guard. Addressing the reporters in a gravelly drawl, he rattled off a prepared speech about being targeted for just living our lives, peppered with vague references to outsiders who'd come to Bayview to stir up trouble. The theatrics made Ingrid's stomach churn. She recognized the tactic all too well. Oppressors casting themselves as victims to confuse the public and erode sympathy for the real targets. Cameras swung between Wolf and the Lindberghs, searching for any dramatic reaction. Ingrid steadied her breathing, scanning the gathered journalists' faces. A few looked skeptical, but some appeared captivated by Wolf's confident bluster. Freya glanced sideways at her sister, silently acknowledging that one impulsive move could be twisted into proof of aggression. So they waited, letting Wolf talk. Finally, Wolf turned his glare upon Ingrid and Freya. These two waltzed into town thinking they could run us out. They attacked us in a diner, unprovoked, and now they're feeding the cops all sorts of lies. His voice rose, accompanied by supportive hollers from his gang. "This ends here," he growled. "We won't be bullied." Murmurs swept through the onlookers. Some eyed the sisters with renewed suspicion, while others shook their heads. Pearl Yamazaki had arrived, standing near Abrams, arms crossed, evidently unconvinced by Wolf's theatrics. Ingrid seized the moment to address the crowd, her voice clear. "The truth is coming to light, Wolf," she said, her calm demeanor contrasting with his heated performance. "Your men have intimidated businesses. We've handed over documents showing evidence of extortion. Stop pretending you're the victim." Several reporters jostled for position, microphones thrust forward. Wolf let out a caustic laugh. "Documents? Show me. Show the public. You talk about them, but where are they?" He waved a dismissive hand, adding, "Oh, you probably forged them to smear my name." Ingrid had braced for this tactic. She could feel the weight of that statement pressing on her, the risk that if she revealed too much, Ethan's life could be in jeopardy. Balancing on a knife's edge, she replied, "Those documents are with law enforcement, where they belong. Investigations take time, and I trust the sheriff's office to handle it properly." Her diplomatic answer was met with a chorus of scoffs from the bikers, but a few heads in the audience nodded, perhaps relieved that they weren't about to see a vigilante display of proof on the street. A momentary stalemate hung in the air. Wolf, chest heaving with contained fury, looked ready to lunge across the barricade. Several of his men flexed their fists. Meanwhile, Ingrid and Freya held their ground, flanked by the watchful eyes of Colonel Abrams and the scowling visage of Sheriff McKinley. For a tense heartbeat, it seemed like Wolf might push matters into violence just to provoke a response. But then, as if remembering the camera lenses capturing every movement, Wolf took a small step back. A faint smirk twisted his lips. "All right then," he said, voice dripping with sarcasm. "We'll let the cops do their job. But mark my words, ladies," he glared at Ingrid and Freya, "if you drag my name through the mud without proof, you'll answer for it." He turned on his heel and signaled for his men to follow. In a roar of revving engines, the bikers mounted their motorcycles. Within minutes, they dispersed down Main Street, leaving behind a charged silence broken only by the hum of cameras and hushed speculation. The crowd lingered, buzzing with conversation about what they'd just witnessed. Wolf had played the role of the beleaguered ringleader, and in doing so, he'd laid the groundwork for a public relations war. Ingrid and Freya stood near Colonel Abrams and Pearl Yamazaki, watching as reporters debated among themselves, some already drafting their pieces on laptops or dictating headlines into microphones. Sheriff McKinley rubbed his temple and trudged back into the station, clearly frustrated by how easily Wolf manipulated public perception. Pearl glanced at Ingrid and Freya. "I'm holding an open forum at the community center tomorrow," she said, pushing strands of her bright scarf back over her shoulder. "We're inviting business owners and residents to come forward with any evidence or personal accounts of intimidation. Would you be willing to attend? It could help break this culture of silence." Freya nodded without hesitation. "We'll be there. The more people speak out, the harder it'll be for Wolf to paint us as liars." Colonel Abrams, arms crossed, chimed in. "I'll see if I can bring some additional security measures. Nothing overt, just enough to deter trouble." His gaze swept over the last few remaining bikers who had lagged behind. Even at a distance, they glared at the group of supporters around Ingrid and Freya, revving their engines one last time before rumbling off. Walking back to their pickup, Ingrid felt an uneasy mix of relief and apprehension. They had avoided a physical clash, but the tension remained thick. Wolf's dramatic act was no surrender. It was a stepping stone in his broader campaign of twisting facts and stoking fear. "We're in for a slog," she said softly to Freya, leaning against the truck's door. Freya's eyes tracked a local news reporter who was describing the protest into her microphone. "We always knew it wouldn't be simple," she murmured back. "At least now more folks realize how serious this is. Wolf can't hide in the shadows." They climbed inside and drove slowly down Main Street, which felt eerily calm after the bikers' departure. Shopkeepers stood outside, gossiping about the demonstration. Some watched Ingrid and Freya pass by with guarded curiosity, others with brief waves of encouragement. A few, perhaps longtime Wolf collaborators, scowled. The twins exchanged silent acknowledgments. The lines in the sand were becoming clearer every day. Back at their apartment, a sense of fatigue hit them like a tidal wave. Ingrid locked the door while Freya double-checked the simple but effective security cameras they'd installed in the hallway. The tiny device winked a small green light, indicating it was still operational. They both sank onto their worn couch, letting out long, synchronized sighs. "I hate this," Freya finally said, pulling off her boots. "I hate that we have to subject an entire town to conflict. But I can't stand by while Wolf terrorizes people." Her words, though quietly spoken, held unshakable conviction. Ingrid offered a half smile, reaching over to squeeze Freya's shoulder. "We didn't start it, but we'll finish it if we have to," she replied, echoing a sentiment they'd shared during countless missions overseas. Yet this time there were no official briefings, no commanding officers to lay out next steps, only a precarious alliance with local law enforcement and the goodwill of the townspeople who dared to believe in a different future. If Ingrid had learned anything from her years of service, it was that sometimes justice hung by the slenderest of threads, reliant on perseverance and a bit of luck to keep from snapping. The following day, Ingrid and Freya arrived at the community center early, helping Pearl Yamazaki set up chairs and a podium. The building was a plain rectangular structure of faded brick, with a few scuffed basketball hoops at the back and a handful of meeting rooms inside. Colored flyers promoting youth programs and bake sales dotted the walls, and the faint smell of old linoleum lingered in the halls. Pearl had labeled the event a town hall for transparency, hoping the neutral branding might draw in citizens who otherwise feared aligning themselves publicly against Wolf. Ingrid arranged a table near the entrance where attendees could place written statements or contact information if they wished to speak anonymously. Meanwhile, Freya tested a small PA system, ensuring the microphone wouldn't fail mid-speech. Both sisters moved with calm efficiency, a silent reflection of their military past. By early evening, a slow trickle of residents ventured in. Some wore anxious expressions, glancing around as if Wolf's men might burst in at any moment. Others clutched folders or envelopes under their arms, possibly containing evidence or personal stories. Pearl greeted everyone with a warm smile, her optimism unwavering despite the unspoken tension. As the chairs began to fill, Ingrid recognized a few faces from around town. Kimberly Watson from the diner, the local librarian who had once pointed her to the best reading spots near the lake, and an older couple who ran a family-owned bakery. Even Colonel Abrams strolled in, offering a courteous nod. Standing near the back, arms folded, were two plainclothes men Ingrid suspected were Abrams's private security. Their alert posture and scanning eyes were unmistakable signs of professional training. At 6 o'clock sharp, Pearl tapped the microphone, clearing her throat. Her bright scarf shimmered under the fluorescent lights. Thank you all for coming. Tonight is about sharing concerns, experiences, and truths that have long been kept in the shadows. Her voice resonated with conviction, slicing through the low hum of chatter. We all know there are tensions in Bayview right now. My hope is that this forum can provide a platform for honest discussion without fear of retaliation. One by one, people raised their hands or stepped forward. An older man recounted how Wolf's men demanded security fees at his car repair shop. A timid-looking single mother spoke of how a biker threatened to break her windows if she didn't pay up at her small thrift store. Kimberly read a statement prepared by a friend who refused to show up in person, describing verbal threats scrawled on her cafe's back door. Each testimony underscored the corrosive atmosphere Wolf had created. Freya and Ingrid watched silently, hearts tight. Their arrival had catalyzed these stories spilling into the open, but guilt nagged at them. Had they put these people at greater risk? Perhaps. Yet as person after person mustered the courage to speak, Ingrid was reminded that Wolf's power relied on isolation and silence. The more voices rallied together, the weaker his grip became. When it was Ingrid's turn to speak, she approached the podium with measured steps, scanning the expectant faces. My sister and I came here for a peaceful life, she began. We've seen conflict in other parts of the world, and we never wanted to bring it with us. But standing against bullies isn't what ruins communities. Fear and silence do. We can't afford either if we want Bayview to thrive. A ripple of nods moved through the room, some tearful, some resolute. She gestured toward the table at the entrance. Any evidence, any testimonies, even if you are not comfortable speaking publicly, leave them here. We'll make sure they get to the right channels. In that moment, Ingrid felt a glimmer of hope. Fear was still present. Everyone could feel it. But courage had begun to flower in the darkness, each person's story shining a light on Wolf's intimidation. If only they could keep that flame alive long enough for justice to take root. Just as the town hall seemed to be winding down, the double doors at the back of the room slammed open. Two figures stood silhouetted against the streetlights outside, broad-shouldered, clad in denim vests. Ingrid's heart lurched. She recognized one of them as Denny, a weaselly young biker from Wolf's inner circle. The other was a surly behemoth named Max, known for his heavy fists and quick temper. A hush fell over the room like a smothering blanket. Freya tensed at the edge of the stage. She locked eyes with Ingrid, their unspoken communication honed by years of partnership. Stay calm, but be ready. Pearl, trying to maintain composure, approached the pair with a polite but firm stance. This is a public forum, she said. You're welcome to speak if you have something to contribute, but keep it civil. Denny sneered, scanning the crowd with predatory eyes. Oh, we got plenty to say, he hissed, a thin smile curving his lips. Max loomed behind him, fists clenched, scanning the room for any sign of challenge. Colonel Abrams shifted near the back, and Ingrid noticed one of his private security contacts stepped discreetly closer to the stage. Tension rippled through the audience. A few people stood, eyeing the exits. Others clutched their purses or backpacks, as though bracing for a fight. Ingrid felt her pulse quicken. If Wolf had sent these two to disrupt the meeting, they might attempt to intimidate the speakers or escalate to violence for maximum shock value. Clearing her throat, Pearl attempted a show of measured hospitality. If you have a perspective you'd like to share, there's a line at the microphone. She gestured to the podium, where a frail older woman was finishing her testimony about overdue repairs she'd neglected for fear of attracting Wolf's attention. Max, apparently unimpressed, let out a grunt. We ain't waiting in line, he spat, bullying his way to the front. The older woman scampered aside, fear etched into her features. Standing at the microphone, Max glared at the crowd. All this whining about extortion. You're blaming Wolf's crew for your own failings. If your businesses can't handle a little overhead, that's on you. A murmur of protest rose from the audience, but Max barreled forward. We provide security. We keep your shop safe from real criminals. But you'd rather moan about a couple bucks a month. Denny chimed in, gesturing toward Ingrid and Freya. And these two? They come to town, start picking fights, and everyone's praising them like heroes. Pathetic. He shook his head as if genuinely offended by the notion of resistance to Wolf's regime. Ingrid could see the mounting anger in the audience. She glanced at Pearl, whose hand trembled around the microphone stand. Pearl took a breath, trying to stay calm. Bullying local businesses isn't a service, she countered, voice quavering but resolute. We know about the threats, the broken windows, the people forced to pay or risk harm. Max's face darkened, veins bulging in his neck. For a second, it looked as if he'd lunge at Pearl. Sensing the imminent danger, Ingrid and Freya moved swiftly, stepping down from the stage to place themselves between Pearl and the bikers. One of Abrams's men also positioned himself closer, though still trying not to incite a fight. The entire room braced for what might happen next, wondering if violence would erupt or if the surging tension would subside under watchful eyes. In that fraught moment, the older woman who had yielded the microphone quietly mustered her courage. She sidled up beside Ingrid and Freya, her voice trembling, yet determined. My husband and I have owned a small upholstery shop for 30 years, she said, projecting as loudly as her fragile frame allowed. We never asked for any protection from your gang. But after we refused to pay, we found our store windows smashed and threatening notes left at our home. A hush followed her words, broken only by a few gasps from those who hadn't realized the full extent of Wolf's tactics. Max's nostrils flared, and Denny's eyes flickered with a trace of uncertainty. The illusions they tried to weave, that their fees were voluntary, that they kept crime away, were unraveling in the presence of raw testimony. Colonel Abrams, still near the back, captured every second on video. Ingrid spotted him angling his phone discreetly, ensuring this confrontation would be on record. If Wolf's men chose violence here, it would not go unseen. That awareness might have stayed their hands, at least for the moment. Freya sensed the shifting energy. Deciding to seize the moment, she met Denny's gaze and said, You could hear it for yourself if you cared about the truth. These people aren't lying. They're scared. Why don't you and Wolf step up and defend your actions in a real conversation, not ambush a community meeting? That struck a nerve. Denny curled his lip, looking momentarily speechless. Max, however, was not so easily deterred. He spat on the floor, his voice a menacing growl. You want a real conversation? How about you start explaining your own lies, like how you magically beat up 5 of our guys if you're just a couple of innocent women? A murmur of confusion swept through the audience, some hearing for the first time that the Lindberghs had faced down Wolf's crew physically. Sensing the conversation pivoting to a more volatile topic, Ingrid maintained her composure. We defended ourselves at the diner. There's security footage showing who threw the first punch. If you want to see it, I'm sure the authorities can share it once the investigation is complete. Pearl added firmly, and until then, this meeting is a place for everyone to speak. You have had your say. Now please allow others to share their experiences without intimidation. She gestured pointedly at the men blocking the stage area. Max opened his mouth to retort, but a voice at the back of the room cut through the tension. That's enough, boomed a commanding tone. Sheriff McKinley strode in, flanked by 2 deputies. The hush that followed was almost reverent. McKinley's gaze was flat and unwavering as it swept over Max and Denny. I'd strongly advise you not to disrupt a lawful community meeting. For a moment, the bikers looked ready to challenge him, but faced with uniformed law enforcement and the silent cameras rolling from multiple angles, they hesitated. With a final snarl, Max turned on his heel, knocking over a chair as he stalked toward the exit. Denny followed, throwing the community center doors wide open. As they left, they shot hateful glares at Ingrid and Freya, a silent promise of future retribution. Once they were gone, the sense of relief in the hall was palpable, though it was tinged with the realization that the confrontation would only fuel Wolf's resolve. Ingrid exhaled, shoulders trembling with adrenaline. Pearl, for her part, offered a nod of gratitude. The assembled townspeople, albeit shaken, resumed sharing their stories. And with each new speaker, the facade of Wolf's protective presence in Bayview continued to crumble. The event carried on late into the evening. By the time the last speaker stepped away from the microphone, a collective exhaustion had settled over the audience. Yet mingled with that fatigue was a spark of defiance. More testimonies had surfaced than anyone anticipated. Tales of back-alley intimidation, property damage, and even a handful of physical assaults left unreported out of fear. Realizing they weren't alone, the townspeople were forging a sense of unity that had seemed impossible just weeks prior. Pearl concluded the meeting with a soft but hopeful address. "The more we gather, the more we share, the less control fear has over us," she said, voice resounding in the quiet hall. "Thank you for coming tonight, and for standing up for what's right." A round of applause rippled through the seats, subdued yet heartfelt. Ingrid and Freya lingered after the majority of attendees shuffled out. They helped Pearl stack chairs and collect the written statements people had dropped into a cardboard box at the entrance. Each slip of paper represented a small act of courage and a growing archive of Wolf's offenses. Colonel Abrams assisted quietly, his expression thoughtful as he reviewed the video footage on his phone. Periodically, one of his private security acquaintances would duck in and out, maintaining an external watch for any suspicious gatherings of bikers. At last, only a handful of them remained in the building. Kimberly approached with tearful eyes. "I never really understood how much suffering was happening behind closed doors," she admitted, hugging the binder of typed notes she'd compiled for the meeting. "Wolf's men never threatened me directly, beyond that night at the diner. But hearing everyone's stories, it's worse than I realized." Freya gently placed a hand on Kimberly's shoulder. "That's how fear works. It isolates everyone so effectively that you can't see the full picture. When the stories finally come together, it's overwhelming." Pearl, overhearing, offered a fragile smile. "But we're bringing those stories out into the open. Even if Wolf tries to scare people again, they know they have each other. And us." Feeling a surge of gratitude, Ingrid scanned the nearly empty hall. It was a far cry from the war zones she had known, but in some ways the stakes felt just as high. Here, everyday folks had found their voices in the face of a domestic tyrant. Ingrid pulled out her phone and checked the time. "We should probably head home. It's late." Abrams cleared his throat, stepping closer. "A word of advice. Stay alert. After what happened tonight, Wolf's men might want to send a message. I'll assign a couple of watchers near your apartment, off the books, just in case." Freya managed a tired nod. "We'll be careful. Thank you, Colonel." She and Ingrid had fought in dozens of campaigns, but it still felt foreign, depending on this network of private help in a small American town. Yet, it was a testament to how precarious the situation had become. Pearl and Kimberly walked out with them, parting ways in the parking lot with subdued goodbyes. The crisp night air tingled with the lingering tension of the evening's revelations. Stars twinkled overhead, offering a fleeting sense of normalcy. Ingrid inhaled deeply, wishing the calm, star-scattered sky could erase the knots of worry twisting in her chest. But the threat remained real. Wolf had lost a public skirmish in the war of information, and now the question was whether he'd retaliate through force or double down on deception. The drive back to the apartment felt like a slow crawl, each block revealing darkened storefronts and dimly lit side streets. Bayview's nighttime hush seemed deeper than usual, as though the town collectively held its breath, waiting for Wolf's next move. Ingrid turned down an alley, making a detour to ensure they weren't being followed. It was a procedure she and Freya had used many times in covert operations, alternating routes, checking mirrors, and varying speeds to flush out anyone tailing them. The roads remained empty. When they finally pulled into their complex's parking lot, Freya circled once, scanning for unfamiliar vehicles. Seeing none, she parked near a flickering lamppost that cast orange light over a few scattered cars. As they approached their building, Ingrid noticed a silhouette near the entrance, a figure leaning casually against the wall. Her pulse spiked, but it quickly leveled when she saw the figure raise a hand in greeting rather than aggression. Stepping closer, they recognized him as one of Colonel Abrams's private security contacts, a lean man named Rico. His face was partially hidden by a baseball cap. "All clear here," he murmured. "I've been doing a sweep every half hour." No suspicious activity so far. Freya nodded, relieved. Thanks for being here. Let us know if you see anything unusual. With a polite nod, Rico resumed his watch and the sisters headed inside. Their apartment, though modest, offered a brief respite. Freya locked the door, then double-checked each window. Ingrid set her phone on the counter, glancing around the living space where mismatched furniture reflected their piecemeal approach to civilian life. Tonight, the small, cramped quarters felt oddly comforting, a shield against the uncertainty lurking outside. As they settled onto the couch, exhaustion crept in. Freya rubbed the bridge of her nose. We've been in combat zones, training fields, and high-pressure missions before, but there's something more personal about this, she admitted. These people we're defending are our neighbors. It's not just some government directive. And Wolf isn't a faceless enemy. He's a manipulative bully who can walk right up to you in the street. Ingrid nodded, leaning forward to rest her elbows on her knees. Exactly. This time, we have no official chain of command, no backup except a few good folks doing what they can. She paused, choosing her next words carefully. But we also have something we never really had overseas, a community that cares. People like Pearl, Kimberly, and all the residents who spoke tonight. We're not just fighting for them, we're fighting with them. A faint smile tugged at Freya's lips. The weight of the day's tension slowly gave way to a subdued sense of purpose. Good point, she said softly. I guess we're used to compartmentalizing, keeping our missions separate from our personal lives. Now everything's intertwined. They shared a moment of quiet understanding, each reliving the evening's flashpoints. The older woman's brave testimony, the scornful sneer of Wolf's men, the hush that followed every harrowing story of extortion and vandalism. All of it underscored the fragility of life in Bayview, and the possibility that solidarity could, in the end, overcome that fragility. Ingrid rose to dim the lights, the gentle glow of a small lamp enveloping the living room in soft amber. We'll rest tonight, she said, voice firm but calm. Tomorrow we regroup. We see what new leads the town hall generated, follow up with Detective Rowan about the documents, and stay vigilant. Freya agreed, stifling a yawn. Sounds like a plan. Despite the weight on their minds, fatigue eventually ushered them into uneasy sleep. Outside their windows, a solitary figure patrolled the parking lot, making sure no threats came lurking in the dark. And so the Lindbergh sisters ended another day on the battlefield that Bayview had become. Still determined, still bound by their promise to each other, and still walking the razor's edge between hope and peril. Early the next morning, Ingrid and Freya Lindbergh awoke to the persistent trill of Freya's phone. The sun had only begun its climb into the sky, casting pale light across the apartment's second-hand furniture. Freya fumbled with the device, blinking away sleep as she answered. Pearl Yamazaki's familiar voice crackled on the other end, brimming with urgency. We have to talk, immediately, Pearl said. Something's happened, and you both need to see it. The sisters exchanged weary but determined looks, their minds already anticipating the worst. Ever since the previous evening's open forum at the community center, Wolf's men had been rattling their sabers in every corner of Bayview. If there was fresh news, it couldn't be good. Ingrid quickly pulled on her worn leather jacket, and Freya grabbed a baseball cap to shield her still sleepy eyes from the strengthening daylight. Within minutes, they were out the door, offering a brief wave to Rico, the security contact posted near the entrance. They found Pearl waiting for them in front of a small insurance office on Main Street, though the building hardly looked like a place of business anymore. Spray-painted threats covered its windows. Traitors beware, Wolf's Town, and other crude warnings. Shards of glass littered the sidewalk, remnants of a vandalized door. The acrid tang of paint fumes still hung in the air. Pearl's expression was grave as she pointed out the damage. Owner's name is Curtis Reed. He came to the community meeting last night, said he'd testify about how Wolf's men forced him into phony liability fees. Now it looks like they decided to send a message. Freya's jaw clenched. This is exactly what Colonel Abrams warned us about. Retaliation. They're trying to scare people into silence again. Ingrid stepped gingerly over the broken glass, letting her gaze roam over the property. The interior was ransacked too, from what she could see through the shattered window. Overturned chairs, scattered files, a toppled, potted plant. Pearl's voice trembled with anger. "And that's not the end of it," she said, pointing across the street. Another business, a modest bakery, had its front window cracked by what looked like a blunt object. The bakery's neon sign flickered erratically, matching the unsettled energy on the street. Mrs. Foley, the owner, was too scared to come to the forum last night, but she was planning to drop off a statement today. Maybe Wolf's people found out. As the three of them surveyed the damage, townspeople passed by, some shaking their heads in dismay, others hustling along to avoid being seen lingering. The fear was palpable. After the show of unity the night before, Wolf's gang seemed determined to muzzle any momentum that threatened their hold. Pearl let out a sigh. "I tried calling the police, but they're swamped. Evidently, there have been multiple incidents like this around town overnight." "Wolf's strategy is clear," Ingrid muttered. "He's hitting multiple targets simultaneously. By the time the law enforcement responds to one, another is already under siege." Freya tilted her head in reluctant agreement. "We need to split up. Maybe help coordinate evidence collection, calm business owners, encourage them not to back down." Pearl nodded, though a flicker of concern crossed her features at the thought of Ingrid and Freya encountering Wolf's crew alone. Still, they all knew passivity would only embolden Wolf further. Before they parted ways, they agreed on a plan. Ingrid would connect with Colonel Abrams about systematically documenting the vandalism, while Freya would visit local shops to reassure owners that they weren't alone. Pearl would keep lines of communication open at the community center, continuing to gather statements. Though it felt like triage, the sisters refused to let Wolf win. This was a new day in Bayview, a day that needed to prove Wolf's reign of fear wasn't as all-encompassing as it once seemed. Splitting up, Ingrid and Freya set their plan into motion. Ingrid headed toward a district near the railroad tracks, where rumors suggested Wolf's cronies had targeted a small hardware supply store. The drive was tense. Each time Ingrid passed a side street, she scanned for the glint of chrome bike parts or the distinctive jackets that marked Wolf's gang. Every so often, she spotted a solitary figure in a doorway or an alley, but none openly confronted her, for now at least. She found the hardware store in disarray, its windows fractured and shelves ransacked. The owner, a stout man named Tomas, stood outside with crossed arm, trying to mask his anxiety with stoic resolve. When Ingrid approached, he shook his head, exhaling shakily. "I've lived here for over 2 decades, he muttered. "Never thought I'd see it like this." Ingrid sympathized deeply. "Were you at the meeting last night, by any chance?" she asked, gently checking if he was another prospective witness. Tomas shrugged, rubbing his temples. "I wanted to be, but my wife's health isn't good. We decided it was safer not to get involved." Guess that didn't matter. He gestured toward the broken glass at his feet, bitterness in his voice. Careful not to step on the shards, Ingrid moved closer to inspect the damage. She snapped a few pictures on her phone. Documenting evidence had become second nature to her, both from her military training and from the realization that the only way to pin Wolf down was to have a mountain of data. Tomas offered a quiet thanks, though Ingrid could see the frustration etched into his features. "It shouldn't be on you and your sister to fix this," he said, frowning. "Where are the police, anyway?" It was a valid question. Ingrid's phone buzzed with a message from Colonel Abrams, who had stationed a contact near the police station. Apparently, every available deputy was out responding to a slew of vandalism reports, theft calls, and intimidation complaints. Wolf, it seemed, had orchestrated a coordinated assault on the community, leaving law enforcement scrambling to keep up. Ingrid typed back a quick reply, urging Abrams to get as many photos and first-hand accounts as possible before evidence was disturbed. Turning back to Tomas, she slipped him a card with the contact information for Pearl's legal advocacy group. "If you are willing to document this, Pearl can help you file an official statement. Don't let them scare you off." Tomas inhaled deeply, nodding. There was relief in his eyes, but also an undercurrent of helpless anger. "Thanks," he murmured. "It helps to know I'm not alone." In that moment, Ingrid realized that beyond simply stopping Wolf, she and Freya were rebuilding something intangible but vital. Faith. Faith that standing up for oneself could make a difference. That collectively, the people of Bayview could reclaim their town. As Ingrid got back into her truck to head to the next troubled spot, she felt a steely resolve. Wolf's spree of destruction wasn't just an act of terror, It was a sign of desperation. His empire was crumbling beneath him, and he was lashing out to reassert control. If the sisters could hold the line, backed by community solidarity, his reign might finally collapse. Meanwhile, Freya navigated a different section of Bayview, a commercial strip dotted with quaint boutiques and family-run eateries. She began her rounds by visiting Jessica's flower shop, one of the businesses that had quietly contributed statements for Pearl's forum. To her relief, the shop seemed untouched. No shattered windows, no malicious graffiti. Jessica herself, however, looked on edge. Freya approached the counter, noticing the tension in Jessica's movements as she arranged a bouquet of lilies. The florist forced a thin smile. "You here to see if we got hit?" she guessed, reading Freya's concerned expression. Freya nodded, offering a reassuring grin. "Yeah, we're trying to check on everyone who's spoken out or planned to." Then, lowering her voice, she added, "Are you okay? Heard about the vandalism around town." Jessica set the flowers aside. "So far, we've been lucky. But I'm not naive. I know Wolf might still target us. I told Pearl everything I saw over the years. How bikers linger outside certain shops. How they collect envelopes of cash. If Wolf connects the dots, he'll know I talked." Empathy stirred within Freya. She recalled how crucial local informants were back in her Special Forces days, and how risky it was for them to speak against powerful figures. "You did the right thing," Freya said gently. "People need to share their experiences, or Wolf keeps winning." Jessica paused, tears welling in her eyes before she blinked them back. "I just want Bayview to go back to normal. I can't keep living like this, always looking over my shoulder." Freya empathized deeply with that longing for normalcy. She and Ingrid had sought exactly that when they came to Bayview, only to find the shadows of their past mirrored in small-town corruption. "We're fighting for a real sense of normal," she promised, "not one propped up by fear. And trust me, Wolf is running out of places to hide." After confirming there were no immediate threats, Freya moved on to her next stop. Every few minutes, she glanced at her phone, scanning for updates from Ingrid or Colonel Abrams. News poured in about fresh incidents of vandalism, a row of parked cars with slashed tires near the library, a historic mural defaced with wolf fangs spray-painted over it. The psychological toll on the residents was mounting by the hour. Eventually, Freya entered a small candy store owned by a mother-daughter duo who clutched each other's hands as they described hearing thumps against their back door the previous night. "We didn't see anyone, but we heard cursing and footsteps," the daughter explained, voice wavering. Freya took photos of the footprints near the entrance, muddy impressions that might belong to heavy boots. While not definitive proof, it could be one more puzzle piece for the police to piece together. Each conversation left Freya grappling with a growing mix of anger at Wolf's brazen tactics and admiration for the townspeople's courage in the face of it. Many had never so much as confronted a shoplifter before, yet they were standing up to a seasoned biker gang. It reminded Freya of the best aspects of humanity, small but meaningful acts of unity and defiance. Glancing out the store's window, she noticed a battered motorcycle rolling slowly down the street, its rider wearing a bandana over his mouth. She stiffened, heart pounding as she watched him pass. He didn't stop, but Freya felt the weight of that silent observation. Wolf's men were everywhere, and they wanted everyone to know it. By mid-afternoon, Ingrid and Freya reconvened at the community center, where Pearl Yamazaki had set up a makeshift command post. The main hall, normally used for youth basketball games or senior socials, was now strewn with tables stacked with printed statements, photographs, and handwritten incident reports. Colonel Abrams stood alongside Pearl, consulting a large map of Bayview taped to the wall. Red pins dotted the locations of overnight vandalism, forming a grim constellation that spanned nearly every neighborhood. Ingrid let out a quiet whistle. They really did hit everywhere, didn't they? Her eyes traveled the map from east to west, counting at least 20 red pins. Abrams nodded, brow knitted in concentration. "It's systematic. Probably half a dozen groups moving simultaneously. Wolf must have planned this for a while, saving it for when he felt cornered." Pearl pointed to a cluster of pins around the downtown area. "We've got consistent reports that Wolf's men were riding in loops all night, showing off their numbers." Freya joined them, placing a folder of her own notes on a table. "That definitely aligns with what I heard," she said. "He's rotating who does the dirty work. so any single witness can't identify more than a couple of faces. A moment later, the tension in the room spiked as the community center doors burst open. Two of Sheriff McKinley's deputies, exhausted and clearly rattled, strode in. One of them, a broad-shouldered man named Deputy Oliver, removed his hat and exhaled. "You folks wouldn't believe the calls we've been handling all day, OM," he said, shaking his head. "We just cleared another break-in at a small electronics shop, and we still have about a dozen more calls pending." Pearl motioned for him to approach the map. "Show us where," she said, brandishing a blue pin. The deputy placed the pin on the same block as the hardware store Ingrid had visited that morning, then turned to face the group. "Sheriff's requested all evidence be routed to the station by tonight. We're going to try to collate everything, see if we can tie these crimes to specific gang members." His partner nodded grimly, adding, "This is bigger than we expected, but we're gathering enough to press charges that can't be dismissed easily." Despite the weight of the situation, Ingrid felt a flicker of hope. If the authorities were finally prepared to take decisive action, Wolf's chaotic spree might end up undercutting his own position. She stepped closer to the deputies. "We've been documenting what we can, photos, timestamps, witness statements. We'll bring it all in tonight. There's a lot." Pearl reached into a file box. "I've got a dozen statements right here," she said. "More in the works. Several business owners came by earlier. They're ready to testify if it means shutting Wolf down." A faint smile tugged at Deputy Oliver's lips. "Good. It means a lot that people trust us enough to share, but we have to be realistic. Wolf isn't going to sit back and let us build a case unchallenged. He'll push back harder if he senses we're close to a real takedown." Silence fell over the group, each mind contemplating the precarious path ahead. Wolf's multi-pronged intimidation campaign had left Bayview reeling, but paradoxically, it was also galvanizing the community. Ingrid thought of the town hall meeting, the wave of testimonials, and now this mapped record of Wolf's aggression. It was as if Bayview itself was finally mustering the will to stand up. The question remained, would they hold strong or fracture under the pressure? Late that evening, Ingrid, Freya, Pearl, and Colonel Abrams made their way to the police station with a thick folder of collected evidence. The sun had long since dipped below the horizon, leaving the town swathed in a hush broken only by the occasional roar of a distant motorcycle. A pair of street lamps flickered ominously, casting elongated shadows that danced across the asphalt. Outside the station, they found a scene of controlled chaos. Patrol cars sat haphazardly in the lot, their red and blue lights still flashing as if the night's emergencies hadn't ceased. Officers bustled in and out of the building, some looking drained beyond measure. The group paused, feeling the energy crackling around them. Sheriff McKinley himself greeted them at the door, arms loaded with paperwork. He ushered them into a cramped conference room near the back. The air inside held the stale tang of burnt coffee and stress. Stacks of documents, half-empty donut boxes, and hastily scribbled notes cluttered the long wooden table. With a curt nod, McKinley motioned for them to sit. "We're compiling everything you brought, along with our own incident reports. Detective Rowan's analyzing patterns in the vandalism. We've even reached out to a contact at the state prosecutor's office." He rapped his knuckles on the table for emphasis. "If we can establish this as organized crime, extortion, intimidation, conspiracy, we're looking at serious felony charges." Pearl spread her meticulously organized evidence across the table. Photographs of broken windows, typed witness statements, annotated maps highlighting hotspots of Wolf's protection scheme. Colonel Abrams contributed video clips recorded from the town hall forum, including the moment Wolf's men burst in to intimidate the attendees. Ingrid set down another batch of documents. Testimony from Ethan, the former gang associate who had slipped them that incriminating envelope. Though Ethan's identity remained undisclosed to most, the statements carried enough detail to strongly implicate Wolf in orchestrating the extortion ring. As McKinley and a team of deputies absorbed the material, Freya noticed the flicker of determination in their eyes. For so long, Wolf's power seemed unassailable, lurking in the gaps where local law enforcement felt hamstrung or indifferent. Now those same officers were ravenous for a chance to pin him down. "We're going to need the cooperation of everyone impacted," Detective Rowan chimed in from a corner of the room where he sorted through the new files. "Not just statements in private, but official testimony. We'll need them to stand in court and confirm the details. That can be intimidating. Pearl pursed her lips, recalling the hesitant faces at the community center. I think we can gather enough people willing to testify. After last night's vandalism, folks realize silence won't protect them. But Wolf's men won't let this unfold without pushing back. McKinley cleared his throat, his voice taking on a matter-of-fact tone. We're prepared for that. We've stepped up patrols. State troopers might lend a hand if we can prove there's an interstate angle, like stolen goods or cross-state threats. If that happens, Wolf won't just face local charges, he'll be dealing with bigger guns. Ingrid exchanged a look with Freya, relief mixing with an undercurrent of anxiety. They had triggered an avalanche of action. The momentum felt unstoppable now, but it also meant the conflict would intensify before any resolution. Where does that leave us? Ingrid asked quietly. We're not official law enforcement. We're just two women who refuse to be bullied. A pause settled over the room. Then Detective Rowan spoke, a hint of respect softening his usual wariness. You've done more for this case than anyone in Bayview. Keep doing what you're doing, gathering info, encouraging witnesses. But watch your backs. If Wolf labels you as the linchpins of this investigation, he may consider drastic measures. That warning proved prescient. Within the next 2 days, rumors swirled that Wolf was actively recruiting out-of-town bikers. Individuals with no loyalty to Bayview, but plenty of appetite for chaos. Ingrid and Freya found themselves juggling constant updates. Calls from business owners worried about suspicious drifters, messages from Colonel Abrams's contacts who observed new bikes rolling through peripheral highways late at night. One evening, Pearl invited Ingrid and Freya to her tiny office near the library to strategize. Posters promoting legal resources lined the walls, but they seemed overshadowed by the sense of urgency that clung to every conversation. Sitting around a cramped desk, they pored over details, possible safe houses for witnesses, a schedule for an upcoming grand jury hearing, and the roles each ally could play. Pearl tapped a date circled in red on a wall calendar. We have a window, about 10 days from now, when the state prosecutor's team will be in town. They'll present the first wave of evidence to a grand jury, aiming for indictments against Wolf and key members of his crew. If that goes well, official arrests could happen soon after. Freya scanned the timeline, a knot tightening in her stomach. That's 10 days for Wolf to intimidate or disappear potential witnesses, she mused aloud, which means we have to keep them safe. If they vanish or recant their statements, the case crumbles. Ingrid's face darkened at the prospect. She recalled missions overseas where local informants mysteriously vanished after the slightest hint of cooperation with foreign troops. Colonel Abrams, joining via speakerphone, added gravely, "We may need to relocate a few key witnesses temporarily. I have colleagues who can arrange safe places or discreet transport out of town, if necessary." The idea of a covert operation to protect civilian witnesses in a small American town underscored how dire things had become. Leaning forward, Pearl glanced between the sisters, her bright scarf sliding off one shoulder. "I've also been advising people on how to file restraining orders, but that's more of a band-aid. If Wolf's men truly want to harm them, a piece of paper won't stop it." A grim silence settled. Ingrid finally spoke, her voice soft but unwavering. "We act like we're on the defensive, but maybe we need to go on the offensive, legally, of course. Is there a way to expedite the indictments? If we have enough evidence already, can we push for immediate arrests?" Pearl sighed. "Nah, I've asked. The prosecutor insists they need this grand jury phase to lock it down. Rushing it might cause slip-ups in court. It's a waiting game, and Wolf is exploiting that delay." The frustration in the room was palpable, but so was the determination. They hammered out a plan to coordinate a community vigilance network. Volunteers who'd keep watch over at-risk businesses and homes, rotate patrols at night, and report any suspicious movements. If Wolf planned to terrorize the entire town, the town would respond collectively, shining a light on every corner he tried to hide in. Before leaving, Freya placed a reassuring hand on Pearl's shoulder. "We'll get there," she whispered, seeing the exhaustion etched into the activist's face. "One day at a time, one witness at a time." Pearl managed a tight smile, nodding. "Bayview's never gone through anything like this, but we're stronger than we look." As Ingrid and Freya stepped outside, the cool breeze greeted them, offering a fleeting sense of relief. Yet they couldn't ignore the heightened tension. A pickup truck idled at the end of the street, headlights glaring, engines softly rumbling. They exchanged a glance, instantly alert. Was it one of Wolf's men, waiting to see who emerged from Pearl's office? They contemplated calling for backup, but decided to simply stroll, daring whoever was in the truck to follow. Just as they reached the corner, the truck sped off into the night. In the days that followed, Bayview underwent a subtle but profound transformation. While Wolf's threats persisted, new graffiti scrawled across buildings, veiled warnings delivered via phone messages. Something else had begun to overshadow the fear. Unity. Everyday people, from shopkeepers to librarians, from retired teachers to young parents, found renewed determination to support each other. Volunteers gathered in the library's main hall each morning. Organized by Pearl and a handful of other local leaders, they formed small groups assigned to different neighborhoods. Some patrolled on foot, keeping an eye out for unfamiliar faces. Others volunteered to drive vulnerable residents home after dark, ensuring Wolf's intimidation tactics found fewer isolated targets. Ingrid and Freya alternated between these groups, splitting their time to cover more ground. Their military background proved invaluable. They coached volunteers on safe observation methods, how to take quick notes, and when to call law enforcement instead of confronting strangers directly. Not everyone was on board. A handful of townspeople, either too afraid or too accustomed to Wolf's presence, muttered that the town was overreacting. They claimed that the sisters' involvement had stirred the pot. Some believed Wolf would have remained content had the Lindberghs not challenged him. But that narrative was increasingly drowned out by the mounting evidence of Wolf's brutality. Meanwhile, Colonel Abrams quietly arranged temporary relocations for a few key witnesses. Some left willingly, relieved to find refuge in nearby counties or with trusted relatives. Others wrestled with guilt for abandoning their businesses, but after receiving direct threats, like smashed windows or prowlers peering into their homes at night, they agreed it was best to lie low until the grand jury convened. Abrams ensured they were monitored by discreet security professionals, people with backgrounds similar to Ingrid and Freya, who understood the stakes and knew how to operate under the radar. Sheriff McKinley and Detective Rowan worked tirelessly, funneling fresh evidence into the soon-to-assemble grand jury. Every day, they uncovered new angles, bank records tying small deposits directly to Wolf's affiliated bank accounts, or cell phone data placing certain bikers at crime scenes exactly when vandalism occurred. The case against Wolf was becoming robust. Still, the specter of open conflict loomed. Wolf himself had gone uncharacteristically silent in public. No more theatrical protests on Main Street, no more swaggering appearances at local bars. Rumor had it he was rallying additional muscle behind the scenes, forging alliances with regional biker gangs who might ride into Bayview under cover of darkness. One afternoon, while Ingrid was reviewing a surveillance video with Pearl, Freya burst into the library, phone in hand. Her face was flushed. "We've got a serious situation," she said, voice hushed but urgent. "A group of bikers showed up near the diner, blocking traffic. They're threatening to clean house. Kimberly's in a panic." Ingrid grabbed her jacket without hesitation, heart pounding as adrenaline surged. She remembered that fateful night in the diner, when Wolf's men had first revealed the depths of their aggression. Now it seemed the cycle was repeating on a much larger scale. Pearl, setting aside the surveillance footage, nodded resolutely. "I'll call the sheriff. You two go. Just be careful." Ingrid and Freya exchanged the kind of look that once preceded storming a hostile compound overseas. This was no longer merely about collecting evidence. It was about protecting people's lives in real time. If Wolf's men wanted a showdown, the Lindberghs would do what they always did, stand their ground. But this time, they weren't just two soldiers in an alien land. They were part of a community that had finally found its voice. Racing through Bayview's narrow streets, Ingrid pressed the accelerator while Freya navigated from the passenger seat, relaying frantic text updates from Kimberly. The diner was situated near a major intersection, meaning blocked traffic could cause havoc if left unchecked. En route, they passed small clusters of onlookers hastily retreating from the commotion. The hum of anxiety was palpable, fueling a sense of urgency. They skidded into the diner's parking lot, heart rate spiking at the sight before them. A pack of 10 or so bikers loitered in the middle of the road, engines revving menacingly, exhaust fumes billowing. Onlookers lined the sidewalks, some filming with trembling phones, others keeping their distance. A couple of drivers stuck behind the blockade leaned on their horns, hoping to nudge the bikers aside. The cacophony of roaring motorcycles, honking cars, and anxious voices made Ingrid's skin prickle with familiar tension. Freya was out of the truck the moment it stopped rolling, Ingrid right at her side. They pushed through the small crowd. Kimberly rushed toward them, eyes wide. "They won't leave," she explained, breathless. "Some are threatening to smash any car that tries to pass. I called the sheriff, but the line was busy. They said they'd send someone." Ingrid scanned the scene, assessing. One biker in particular, beefy, tattooed arms and a shaved head, seemed to be directing the others. He pointed aggressively at a sedan that attempted to inch past. Another biker responded by slapping the car's hood, leaving a dent. Tension rippled through the crowd. Freya took a step forward, arms raised to signify she meant no immediate harm. "Hey," she yelled over the engines, "move aside and let traffic through. This doesn't need to turn into a fight." The leader's gaze snapped to her, a predatory grin forming on his lips. He recognized the Lindberghs, no doubt. With a theatrical rev of his engine, he rolled his bike forward. "What are you gonna do, ladies?" he sneered. "Call the cops? We ain't leaving till we send a message." Freya stood her ground, carefully positioning herself to see all the bikers at once. Ingrid, meanwhile, flanked her, scanning for possible blind spots. Some of the onlookers whispered among themselves, uncertain whether they were about to witness a heroic intervention or a catastrophic beatdown. The diner's neon sign buzzed overhead, as if bracing for more broken glass and chaos. "I don't know what message you think you're sending," Ingrid said, voice loud and clear, "but it ends here. Harassing innocent people isn't going to help Wolf's cause." A flicker of confusion crossed the biker leader's face, as though Ingrid's calm defiance unsettled him. The spectacle was reminiscent of the first confrontation at the diner, except now the stakes were higher, the players more numerous, and the entire town seemingly watching. As if on cue, a pair of squad cars rounded the corner, lights flashing. The bikers tensed, some revving their engines as if deciding whether to flee or to fight. The leader barked an order, "Hold your ground." But as the patrol cars screeched to a halt, a loudspeaker crackled. "This is the Bayview Police Department. Disperse immediately or face arrest." A hush fell, broken only by the deep rumble of engines. Ingrid noted the arrival of Deputy Oliver, stepping out of one cruiser, his posture radiating authority. The big question was whether the bikers would respect that authority or escalate. In the tense standstill, the sisters remained poised, a silent vow echoing between them. "We will not back down." Seconds ticked by like hours. The standoff between law enforcement and the blockade of bikers crackled with potential violence. People shifted nervously on the sidewalks, capturing the tense moment with their smartphones. Kimberly, standing just behind Ingrid and Freya, clutched her phone in one trembling hand, as though debating whether to film or flee. Deputy Oliver stepped forward, flanked by another officer. He repeated his warning, voice steady, "Move your bikes now or you're all subject to arrest for obstruction and vandalism." Several bikers glanced at their leader, who continued to glare daggers at Ingrid and Freya. It was clear the Lindbergh's involvement fueled his bravado. He wasn't backing down without a show of force. Abruptly, the leader killed his engine and swung off his motorcycle, fixing his gaze on Ingrid. "You want us to leave? Why don't you make us?" he growled. Another biker snickered, stepping in behind him. Ingrid's muscles tensed. She could practically taste the adrenaline. Her training told her that if violence erupted now, it would be messy. But her conscience reminded her that half a dozen cameras were pointed in their direction. A single misstep could confirm the twisted narrative Wolf was trying to sell, that the Lindberghs were aggressors. Freya took a small, deliberate step forward. Her voice carried a calm authority. "We don't want to fight, but we won't let you terrorize this town. Let the people drive through and no one gets hurt. You can't win this. Every camera is rolling, and there are multiple witnesses." In response, the leader swung a heavy fist. Freya anticipated it, sidestepping gracefully so the blow barely grazed her shoulder. A collective gasp rippled through the crowd. Deputy Oliver rushed to intervene, but two more bikers moved in, blocking his path. Ingrid felt time slow as she locked eyes on the leader's stance, reading his next move. Another punch, wide and telegraphed. This time she parried it cleanly with her forearm, countering with a swift palm strike to his chest. He stumbled back, more stunned than hurt. "Stand down," the deputy shouted, but chaos was already unfolding. Another biker lunged, this time at Ingrid. She ducked the swing and delivered a measured kick that connected with his thigh, unbalancing him. To the onlookers, it appeared almost effortless, like the sisters were performing a well-rehearsed routine. But Ingrid's heart hammered. Each movement carried weighty repercussions. They had to use exactly as much force as needed, no more. Several more police officers arrived, funneling in from side streets. A few bikers saw the reinforcements and decided to peel off, engines roaring as they raced away. The more brazen among them stayed, taking half-hearted swings at law enforcement. One officer tackled a fleeing biker, while another subdued a second man with pepper spray. In less than a minute, the standoff turned into a series of arrests. The leader tried one final push, driving a fist toward Freya's jaw. She deflected it with a crisp motion, hooking his arm and twisting it just enough to drop him to his knees. Deputy Oliver dashed forward with cuffs, grateful for the assist. As the man was hauled to his feet, then he spat out, "You'll regret this! Wolf isn't going down without blood!" Freya exhaled, adrenaline thrumming through her veins. "Tell Wolf we're not scared," she said quietly. Around them, the blockade had been dismantled, scattered bikes left in the road as their riders surrendered or fled. Exhausted relief washed over the onlookers. The threat had been quelled, at least for now. But the man's final words rang in everyone's ears, a chilling reminder that Wolf's next move might be even more extreme. The local news stations wasted no time broadcasting footage of the brief brawl. By nightfall, Bayview's social media buzzed with clips showing Ingrid and Freya defending themselves against Wolf's men. Reactions ran the gamut from admiration, "Those sisters saved the day again," to apprehension, "This is escalating. Somebody's going to get killed." Meanwhile, a vocal minority still blamed the Lindberghs for provoking the conflict, although the real-time videos made such accusations harder to sustain. Within hours, Colonel Abrams arrived at the sisters' apartment, the tension practically radiating off him. He'd been monitoring the day's events through local channels and his own network of informants. "That footage looks bad for Wolf," Abrams said, pacing across the worn living room carpet. "Those guys attacked unarmed civilians, resisted arrest. There's no spinning that into victimhood." Yet Ingrid couldn't shake the feeling that Wolf would indeed try to spin it, citing the sisters' uncanny combat skills as evidence of their dangerous nature. Freya sank onto the couch, exhaustion evident in her posture. "What do we do next?" she asked Abrams. "The grand jury hearing is still a few days away, but Wolf's men are out there and he'll want payback after this fiasco." Abrams nodded grimly. "I'm stepping up security. Sheriff McKinley will coordinate plainclothes officers to patrol the key areas: diner, community center, your apartment complex. Pearls also asked for volunteer escorts for people heading to the station to give statements. If Wolf tries anything, we'll be ready." Despite the measures, Ingrid couldn't dismiss the gnawing dread in her gut. What if Wolf orchestrates a bigger attack? Something that no volunteer watch can easily handle? Abrams paused, contemplating. "It's a possibility. However, it'd be reckless. The more blatant his violence, the more it undermines his narrative. He wants to intimidate witnesses, but not so overtly that the entire world demands his arrest. Right now, your biggest threat is random assaults by his loyalists, not an all-out war in the streets." Freya exchanged a look with Ingrid, recalling the vow they'd made upon leaving the military. No more living in constant battle. Yet here they were again, anticipating the next ambush. "At least the people of Bayview are banding together," Freya offered, half to herself. "They've seen Wolf's true colors. Maybe that will keep them strong until the legal system takes over." Abrams exhaled, nodding. "Let's hope so. For now, rest if you can. We'll keep watch outside." After a brief strategy session, arranging which volunteers would pair up for night patrols and how to coordinate with the sheriff's office, Abrams departed, leaving the sisters alone in the apartment's soft lamplight. For a while, neither Ingrid nor Freya spoke. The quiet was almost oppressive, filled with the echoes of the day's chaos. Finally, Freya rose to brew some tea. "Remember how we dreamed about a calm life?" she murmured, voice laced with wry resignation. "Funny how the calm never lasts." Ingrid's lips curved into a tired smile. "We keep finding ourselves in the middle of battles, one way or another." She settled back against the couch cushions, letting the hum of the kettle soothe her nerves. "At least this time we're fighting for a place we care about." They sipped tea in companionable silence, each lost in thought about the precarious state of their adopted town. As the night deepened, a patrol car idled outside, its headlights cutting through the darkness like beacons of cautious hope. Sleep eventually came, fitful yet necessary, as the sisters braced for the final leg of a conflict that had turned Bayview upside down and might soon decide its fate. The grand jury convened on a sweltering morning, the humidity so thick it felt like a blanket draped over Bayview's shoulders. Residents lined the courthouse steps, many holding signs that read things like "Justice for Bayview" and "End the Intimidation." Despite the muggy air, the energy was electric. Reporters roamed the sidewalks, shoving microphones toward anyone who seemed even remotely involved. Pearl arrived with a small group of witnesses, shop owners, ex-members of Wolf's gang, and everyday citizens fed up with living in fear. Ingrid and Freya stood off to one side, accompanied by Colonel Abrams. They watched as each potential witness climbed the courthouse steps, escorted by deputies. While the proceedings were closed to the public, typical of grand jury investigations, the arrival of these individuals spoke volumes. One by one, they disappeared behind the heavy wooden doors, ready to reveal Wolf's crimes under oath. A hush settled when a sleek black SUV pulled up to the curb. Out stepped a stern-faced man in a tailored suit, Assistant District Attorney Harris. He paused briefly, acknowledging the crowd, then strode inside. If successful, he would present the mountain of evidence painstakingly gathered over the past weeks. Ethan's documents, witness testimonies, financial records, security footage from the diner, and the video Colonel Abrams captured at the community center. Pearl approached Ingrid and Freya, her bright scarf sticking to her neck in the heat. "Some of the folks are nervous as can be, but they're doing it anyway," she said, her eyes flicking anxiously to the courthouse doors. "If Wolf intimidates them enough to make them back out, the entire case could collapse. But so far, no one's wavered." Freya let out a relieved breath. "That's a testament to your work, Pearl, and to the fact that people are just plain fed up with being bullied." Across the street, a group of Wolf's supporters lingered, some wearing biker vests, others milling about with the arms crossed. Their presence felt like a dark cloud overshadowing the proceedings. A few glowered openly at the crowd of onlookers. Ingrid noticed a tall woman in biker gear filming the courthouse arrivals with her phone, likely collecting intel for Wolf. Colonel Abrams followed Ingrid's gaze, nodding. "They're trying to see who's testifying," he muttered. "We might need to arrange safe rides home afterward." The morning dragged into early afternoon, an endless wait punctuated by updates from occasional text messages or whispered rumors. A sense of solidarity bound the onlookers together, though. Strangers offered bottled water and handheld fans, or they shared anxious speculation about what was happening behind those sealed doors. Would the grand jury issue a flurry of indictments or request more evidence? Eventually, Assistant DA Harris emerged, brow glistening with sweat. Cameras flocked to him as he held up a hand for calm. "The grand jury is still deliberating," he said in a flat, professional tone. "We've presented extensive testimony and documentation. We can't comment on ongoing matters, but we remain confident in our case." Reporters shouted questions, but Harris offered no further details. He stepped back into the SUV, flanked by staffers who hurried him away from the throng. The crowd, deflated by the anticlimax, gradually dispersed. Even so, an undercurrent of optimism lingered. The mere fact that the hearing proceeded without major witness withdrawals or violent eruptions was a victory in itself. Freya caught Pearl's eye. "Now we wait, I guess," she said, swallowing her frustration at the slow wheels of justice. Pearl nodded, tucking a stray curl behind her ear. "We do. Let's hope it's not in vain." As Ingrid ushered a few anxious witnesses toward cars waiting to shuttle them home, she couldn't help but notice that the group of bikers across the street had vanished. Whether that was a sign of Wolf's confidence or a strategic retreat, she couldn't say. But one thing was clear: the next move belonged to the legal system. If the grand jury delivered indictments, Wolf's fortress of intimidation would crack wide open. If not, Bayview might sink further into fear. For now, all they could do was hold their collective breath. Late that evening, the phone started buzzing. Pearl called Ingrid and Freya first, her voice trembling with a mix of excitement and relief. "They've issued indictments," she said, sounding as though she could hardly believe it herself. "Multiple counts: extortion, conspiracy, assault, property damage. Wolf is named as the ringleader." Ingrid almost dropped her phone from sheer relief. Freya's eyes widened, and she grabbed Ingrid's hand, an unspoken celebration passing between them. Moments later, Colonel Abrams called with confirmation. The state prosecutor had made an official statement. Arrest warrants would be executed within hours for Wolfie and key members of his gang. "We have to be prepared for a last-ditch effort by Wolf to flee or retaliate," Abrams warned. "Sheriff McKinley's already got squads on alert. We'll coordinate roadblocks and keep an eye on the highways." Word spread rapidly through Bayview. The next morning, the diner hummed with hushed excitement as Kimberly served coffee to customers who finally saw a glimmer of hope. At the community center, Pearl compiled a fresh wave of volunteer signups, folks wanting to help ensure Wolf couldn't slip out of town unnoticed. Even the gloomier corners of Bayview buzzed with talk of a future free from intimidation. Yet, a pervasive tension underpinned this flurry of optimism. Wolf was a cornered animal now, and cornered animals had nothing left to lose. True to form, he didn't surface publicly. Instead, rumors circulated that he'd barricaded himself somewhere on the outskirts of Bayview. Ingrid and Freya took it upon themselves to drive by certain notorious hangouts: a grimy garage near the interstate, a tumble-down farmhouse rumored to be a stash house, but found no immediate sign of Wolf or his top lieutenants. By mid-afternoon, the sisters were summoned to the police station. Inside a small briefing room, Sheriff McKinley, Detective Rowan, and a handful of deputies pored over a large county map. Colored pushpins identified places Wolf might hide. "We've got warrants for nearly a dozen individuals," McKinley said, glancing up from the map. "Our biggest concern is Wolf slipping away or resorting to violence. He's always bragged that he'd go out in a blaze of glory before letting the law take him down." Detective Rowan added, "We'll form search teams to hit known hangouts simultaneously so we don't give Wolf time to relocate. Colonel Abrams's contacts will assist. We could use your help too, but we won't force you." Ingrid and Freya exchanged glances, unspoken agreement flashing between them. They'd been in the thick of this from the start. They weren't about to sit on the sidelines now. "We'll go where you need us," Ingrid said simply, ignoring the flicker of concern in McKinley's eyes. The sheriff knew their combat skills were an asset, but he also felt responsible for their safety. Eventually, he nodded, accepting their decision. Deputies spent the next hour hashing out assignments, code names, and rendezvous points. Pearl was asked to remain at the station, coordinating updates from multiple search teams. Abrams, standing in the corner with arms folded, offered to lead one group through the farmland west of town, rumored to be a safe haven for Wolf. Ingrid and Freya were placed with Deputy Oliver in a small unit assigned to comb the industrial district near the old rail yard. That was where Wolf's presence had been strongest, where the shattered windows and graffiti-laced warehouses bore constant testimony to his iron-fisted approach. As they finalized the plan, an almost electric anticipation charged the air. Each participant understood that the coming operation was high stakes. Success meant the end of Wolf's tyranny. Failure could plunge Bayview into deeper darkness. Leaning over the map with Deputy Oliver, Ingrid pinched the pushpin that indicated Wolf's rumored hideout. "This is it," she thought. "Time to finish what we started." The sun hung low over Bayview's skyline as the coordinated raids began. Police cruisers, unmarked SUVs, and Colonel Abrams's discreet vehicles fanned out across the region, each converging on a specific site. For Ingrid and Freya, the journey led them into a warren of abandoned warehouses, where crumbling brick walls and rusted metal gates testified to economic downturns from decades past. Weeds sprouted through cracks in the pavement, and the setting sun painted everything in a stark orange glow. Deputy Oliver parked their SUV in a shadowed alcove behind a chain-link fence. Ingrid and Freya slipped out quietly, scanning the perimeter. The others in their unit, wearing bulletproof vests and armed with standard-issue sidearms, formed a single-file line behind Oliver. This had all the hallmarks of a well-executed military operation: save for the fact that most participants were small-town officers who had never faced a full-scale standoff. Ingrid recognized their nervous resolve, recalling how crucial calm leadership was in moments like these. A distant rumble of motorcycles in the alley made her heart pound. She raised a hand, signaling the group to take cover. Freya crouched beside her, peering around a broken concrete pillar. Two bikes roared by, their headlights sweeping across the decaying walls. They didn't stop, likely a recon run. Once the bikes vanished, Oliver motioned the team to advance deeper into the complex. One warehouse loomed larger than the rest, its corrugated metal door partially ajar. The faint glow of a lamp leaked out, illuminating the dust motes in the gloom. Inside, they could hear muffled voices, one of which was unmistakably Wolf's. He was pacing, cursing, issuing demands in a furious tone. The words, "We'll go out blasting," reached Ingrid's ears, igniting a surge of dread. So Wolf really is prepared to fight until the bitter end. Deputy Oliver braced himself against the side of the door, whispering into his radio to alert the rest of the squads. A hushed reply came. Multiple arrests were already underway at other locations, but Wolf's top lieutenants had eluded capture. That likely meant they were here, inside this building, planning a final stand. Ingrid locked eyes with Freya, adrenaline surging. This is it. She gestured for Oliver to wait a few beats. If Wolf was truly armed, a reckless entry could spell disaster. Instead, they tried negotiation first. Oliver pressed the talk button on a handheld loudspeaker. "Wolf, we have a warrant for your arrest. Come out peacefully." A tense silence followed, broken by Wolf's sardonic chuckle from inside. "Peaceful?" he echoed, voice echoing in the cavernous warehouse. "You must be joking." A shiver ran down Freya's spine. She remembered a mission overseas where an insurgent leader had used nearly the same tone, the same refusal to back down. Sometimes the only outcome was a violent confrontation. She positioned herself behind a metal support beam, while Ingrid flattened against the adjacent wall. Wolf's voice growled again. "I see a single badge cross that threshold. I start shooting." Despite the fear in the pit of her stomach, Ingrid felt a fierce determination. This was what they'd been fighting for all along, a final confrontation with the man who terrorized an entire town. If they could bring him in, Bayview might finally breathe free. Deputy Oliver nodded grimly to the group, speaking low. "I've got backup en route, but we can't just let him dig in. Too many ways for him to slip out." Another officer prepared a flashbang grenade, while Colonel Abrams reported via radio that his team was locked down on the building's west side, preventing any rear escape. Time slowed to a crawl. The plan was to breach, disorient Wolf and his men, and secure the area with minimal bloodshed. Ingrid and Freya steeled themselves. They'd done this dozens of times in uniform, but never in a place they called home. "Bayview is worth it," Ingrid reminded herself. With a subtle nod from Oliver, they moved. The flashbangs soared inside, then erupted in a burst of light and a deafening roar. Shouts rang out. Gunfire rattled the walls, sparks flickering as bullets ricocheted off metal beams. Then, in a swirl of dust, the law enforcement team surged through the doorway. Looking back at everything that happened, from the twins' first day in Bayview to the decisive moments that exposed Wolf's empire, one truth stands out. A united community can overcome even the fiercest intimidation. I personally admire how Ingrid and Freya helped the town rediscover its own resilience. Their story proves that ordinary people, working together, can dismantle fear and injustice. It also reminds us that standing for what's right is never easy, but it's always worth it in the end. Thank you for joining us on this journey. We hope this story sparks conversation about courage, unity, and the importance of standing up for one another. We'd love to hear your thoughts. What moments resonated with you the most? Share your comments below, and let's keep the discussion going. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more stories that uplift, inspire, and remind us of our own power to create change. Stay brave, everyone.